Good morning, afternoon, or evening, and welcome to the Bloody Disgusting Network. The passage of time will now bring you to something strange, unique, and idiosyncratic. Have a good time.
My friendship to all of you precludes my involvement with any one of you. But if you wanna make love, then I do too, and I'll be right there behind you. All in the name of oh, all in the name of oh, all in the name of oh.
Hush, little losers, don't say a word. Why? Because we're talking and that would be rude. Hello, my name is Rockin' Randall, aka the Sandman. That's right, it was me who put all the women to sleep. Good luck chasing me with a rolling pin now. Okay, just kidding. Today, we have gathered to discuss Sleeping Beauties, a 2017 novel Stephen King wrote with his son. No, not Joe Hill, but rather Owen King, the author of the 2005 collection We're All in This Together, the 2013 novel Double Feature, and last year's The Curator. Owen was also a producer and writer on the 2020 miniseries adaptation of The Stand and co-wrote the story's new ending with his dad. So another little collab there. Very sweet. So this is an interesting one, as like Gwendy's Button Box, this book actually came out after we had started the podcast. I believe Justin shared some brief thoughts on it at the time, but now, 7 years later, it's time to give it the old Losers Club treatment. But before we claw through the fine webbing separating us from our brilliant thoughts, I'll ask you all to politely leave us a review on your podcast provider of choice, and also check out our Patreon at patreon.com/thebarons, where we have hundreds of hours of bonus content, including full reviews of all of the books, I think post later, that have come out since we started the pod. We didn't have the cool idea to record full episodes back when Sleeping Beauties came out. So this will be an interesting one. All right, let's introduce our panel. Jen, say hello and tell me, how did it feel to revisit Sleeping Beauties?
Hey, this is Jen to the Rage Adams. And again, my nickname is particularly apt this time as well, because this was a much more emotional read. I think this time around, the first time I read it, I just got to it in the chronology. It was probably around 2014, 15, 16, somewhere around there.
Well, this book came out in 2017. Exactly. So
okay, well, it wasn't before then. So it must have been.
Unless you got an advanced copy.
I don't remember when I read it for the first time. But since I read it for the first time, I have lost some rights. And reading this in the wake of what happened a couple of weeks ago was, let's just say it's the perfect time to read this, because I was able to channel a lot of my feelings through this book. And I cried, I was mad, and, excited to talk about it. But it was definitely a more emotional read this time.
Interesting. Julia, say hello and tell me, was this your first read of Sleeping Beauties, or were you revisiting it?
This is Julia. He thrusts his fist against the post and still insists he sees the ghost, Mark Hesse. Nice. And this is my second time reading it. So same with Jen. Like it felt more immediate this time, and I was like, oh, this feels poignant, very pointed and aggressive. This read this time. But there's a lot of questions that were brought up in the book that I'd actually never considered. So I'm really excited to talk to you about that and kind of. Things I should have considered, when thinking about gender that I just didn't. So I'm excited to talk to you about it. Let's see what you all think.
Yeah, love it. Very glad you're here. Dan Flieger, say hello and tell me, what's your relationship to this book?
This is Dan, a Stephen King novel set in a prison, Flieger. And this is actually my first time. I'm not gonna say first time in a long time, but first time holding off until my reread. Oh my.
Reread.
When I reread this novel eventually, when I reread them all. But yeah, this was my first time. I'd been meaning to get through this, and I will say this is, in my adult life, the longest I've spent reading a Stephen King novel. I just could not consume this one at a pace that I usually try to get them out in a few settings, and this one took me a few months.
Yeah. It is a hefty boy. Mm-hmm. The thing is, it's like, a lot of Stephen King books are 700 pages. But this one, it didn't just like feel longer to me, but the actual copy that I read, the hardcover, I had the first edition hardcover. It's like yeah, you have it too, Julie. It's so thick. It just feels, yeah, we all have it. It's so thick. Like my wife would look at it and just be like, well, I guess if we need to flatten anything, we can just put that on top of it.
Yeah,
So,
I remember when we were doing Mr. Mercedes, and Jen kept being like, "You're still watching the show," and that like stuck with me because as I was reading this novel, I was like, "I'm still reading this." And
well,
it's
yeah,
not
she would also say that. You're still reading that? Okay, well,
Yeah,
I think
it's
she
not even the
understood it.
size or the length, but it's because I've read a bunch of the other ones too. It just for some reason this one really I got like bogged down in a lot of the chapters where it didn't feel like a page turner the way that most King feels as I'm reading it.
Well, Dan, it's not about the size of the boat. It's the motion in the ocean.
I knew I would
With
set
that-
myself up for something like that.
That's how you read
God,
it.
typical male pig.
That's the role I am
Zing.
going to embrace and fulfill in this episode.
What
I'm
about-
glad we got,
what about
I'm
you,
glad we
Randall?
got 2 guys and 2 gals. We got a
Yeah.
little battle of the sexes here. No, I'm just kidding. We're all
What
here
was,
to collaborate.
What was
and
your
have fun.
experience? If I
Oh,
can
my
ask you,
experience.
what
This was my
yours?
first time with this book. Yeah, I had missed this one. I think it's funny because we had started the pod, so you'd think I would have been like rared up, like all ready to go to read New King. But I think at the time I was probably like knee deep in Firestarter or The Long Walk or something. So it just never came across my desk. We got a couple copies, I think, for the pod, but I think Mike and Justin had those, so I just never had it with me. And so, yeah, this one just kind of slipped by, but I'm really glad I read it because I do think it is both like familiar, but also very unique within the King canon. And I think we're going to unpack what that means, a little bit more as we keep talking. So with that sorted, let's dust off the history of this behemoth in the Derry Public Library.
Mike Hanlon, if you see...
Excuse me, sir. Do you have Prince Albert in a can? You do? Well, you better let the poor guy out.
Tell Mike Hanlon that I had to go, that I had to get cleaned up. Tell him I'll see him tonight.
Get out! Last chance, Doja. Get out! Get out!
All right. So here in the Derry Public Library, we talk about the history, we read some reviews, and we read some quotes from King, but also from Owen King, who co-wrote this book with his dad. And honestly, he has some of the better quotes, I think. And it is actually, I will say, what was really enjoyable about this was reading some, we can't get into all of them, obviously, but like reading some of Owen's quotes about just what it was like to grow up with your dad as Stephen King. And I don't know, some of it was just really sweet. Like, and the way that, and one of the things he said, and I'll bring this up again later, was that, like, I watched a couple of the panels that they did because they kind of went on tour with this. And Owen would say, this book was just kind of like having a year-long conversation with my dad. And I'm like, that's just really lovely,
That is sweet.
And so I think, like, no matter my feelings about this book, which are complicated, I think I can feel a lot of love in it. And I like the idea of writing a book with your dad is something that I think is so cool and very few people would ever get to experience. So I'll just throw that out there. A little positivity to kick us off. So Sleeping Beauties was first mentioned during a promotional appearance on the CBC radio program Q. King said, "Owen brought me this dynamite idea, and I've collaborated a couple of times with Joe. I'm not going to say what the idea is because it's too good." The book was released on September 26, 2017. It reached #1 on the New York Times bestseller list, and from what I can gather, remained there until about mid-November or thereabouts. Before its release, it was picked up by a production company to develop it into a TV series, which is kind of funny since the Kings had initially begun writing this story as a limited TV series before deciding a novel was the better route for it. And then it wasn't until 2019, this is from Deadline, AMC made a pilot script commitment for what they called an open-ended TV series. I imagine in the same vein as Under the Dome, which didn't necessarily attempt to adapt King's book so much as use the premise as an ongoing series that could have gone for probably as many seasons as they wanted. But the show kind of, dipped. We talked about that. Okay. And And anyways, Owen was set to write the pilot script for Sleeping Beauties on AMC. Owen, and this is just a quote from Ashley Zalta, Sugar 23's head of production and executive producer. She said, Owen and Stephen King found the perfect canvas to tell a haunting and gripping story that sparks a relevant conversation about gender equality and individuality. We couldn't be more excited about this collaboration with the Kings and with AMC, who have so often boldly redefined genres. Stephen King said, I'm tremendously excited to see Sleeping Beauties brought to life in a format that will allow the story to be told as it was meant to be told, in all its mystery and drama. So there hasn't been any updates since then, sadly. I do wonder if the underperformance of the network's adaptation of Joe Hill's Nosferatu maybe had an impact. Of course, AMC's generally been pretty underwater over the last several years. If it ain't a zombie, they ain't interested. But it was also adapted into a 10-issue comic book series from IDW Publishing with writer Rio Ewers, artist Allison Sampson, and colorist Triona Farrell. You can pick that up. I believe they packaged all 10 issues in one volume. Have any of you guys seen this? I've not seen it.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
No, I just heard about it today when I was doing the research.
Yeah.
Sounds interesting, though. I'd
Yeah.
like to see some of the visuals, especially like the tree and the fox and stuff.
Yeah, I feel
We
like
could do an episode on it, right?
Yeah, we absolutely could. I mean, that's one thing I was thinking maybe next year is to do a series on some of these comic adaptations. Flieger, I know you guys have, on the Dark Tower Detour, you've talked about the Dark Tower comics.
Yeah, we've gotten pretty in-depth in some of those.
Yeah.
But for this one, I just kept picturing the fox as the Johnny Cash coyote from The Simpsons. Where
Yeah.
He's like, find your soulmate, Homer. And
I
just
love
like
that
picturing the
episode.
fox speaking to the characters like this.
What I'll always remember from that episode is when Homer because they're going to the chili tasting, and Homer goes, Marge, get my chili eating boots. And she actually brings him like an actual pair of boots. Like, it just made me laugh. Okay.
That's such a great episode.
It is. So yeah, no, but I do think it could be cool to do some episodes on like the Stand comic adaptations and the Sleeping Beauties ones. And then I know that there's a couple others, but I'm blanking on
We
them
did
right
like
now.
Battle of Jericho Hill was one of them. Besides
Yeah,
just
I
the Dark
mean-
Tower, that's like a separate one. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah, see, that's the thing is I haven't read the Dark Tower one, so I'm not sure how much they like deviate from the actual story. So
Slightly, but they add a little more color, but I don't know if they're officially canon. And I picture most of the comics, you have to let the artist and the writer take a little bit of liberties with it, but still
Well,
interesting to see.
if you want to hear the Dark Tower Dan's gab about the Dark Tower comics, you can subscribe to our Patreon and listen to the Dark Tower Detour. It's a great little
Dark
series.
Tower Dance.
Yes, right. A lot of D's. Okay, so big D's. All right. So in Owen and look at who's the little boys now, huh?
I know.
So we have some quotes here. I kind of cobbled together some stuff from several different interviews. Thanks as always to Bryant Burnett, who is our official Stephen King archivist and historian. This man has been such a boon in making sure that we get comprehensive coverage on this pod. He sent me a lot of, I think, under the radar interviews I would not have found otherwise. And I pulled from some of those. And then also from an interview. Did you guys all have the interview in the back of your book with Owen King and Stephen King? I pulled a lot from that. And actually, they cover so much in that is also talked about in the a lot of the interviews. So I kind of use that as the primary source. Why don't we read this? There's Owen King and there's Stephen King. They're going to trade off ideas here. This is talking about the idea and the beginnings. So, Flieger, why don't you read Stephen King? And Jen, why don't you read Owen King? Does that sound good?
Right.
All right. Whenever you're ready.
All right. In our family, we do a lot of pitching of ideas to each other, not generally with the intention of making a novel out of them. It's usually just to get a laugh.
Yes, we cook ideas around the dinner table.
So I had the idea and I said, well, what about a story where all the women in the world have fallen asleep? And my dad said, that's an awesome idea. And I said, great, go write it. And he said, no, you have to write it. And we went back and forth in that fashion for quite a while. But eventually we settled on writing it together. I don't know if there was something in the air related to political events or what, but that's how it happened.
When Owen pitched that idea, what about if all the women fall asleep? I immediately started to think of all the ramifications. And I said, we really ought to write this. We started to write it as a television script, not a novel. And we actually wrote a pilot episode.
We did a second episode as well.
And then Owen said, whoa, wait. We've got to do this as a book.
Yes, it was an exciting TV series, but it felt hemmed in because of the 1 hour format we were working with. I wanted to do more with the characters, and I felt like it should be a book before it was a show.
Right. And the women weren't singing the way we wanted them to sing.
I always want your women to sing. You know?
The next quote is to an interview with Lit Reactor. This is Owen. Julia, do you want to read this quote?
Part of what makes this book so different for me is that up to this point, I've only dabbled in fiction that could be described as fantastic. When we started, I didn't know if I could write a big novel that had these supernatural components, if I could maintain the pace, keep inventing and building on the conceit. It was a big thrill to stretch myself in a new direction, and obviously, it didn't hurt that my collaborator was someone with experience in that field.
Yeah, that's a big step up, I'd say. But no, have you guys read any Owen? Any of you?
Mm-mm.
Yeah, I haven't either.
No, I do like that song "We're All in This Together" from High School Musical, though.
Did he write that?
I don't know.
Well, it's the name of his first collection, so he
I know,
probably
so
also
he must
wrote the
have.
song.
Yeah.
I did own this G.I. Joe, I gotta say.
We're going to talk about the G.I. Joe. Do you guys know the G.I. Joe story? It's really interesting.
Not until I saw it in the outline.
Okay, we're going to get
cool.
there. It's really fun. Okay, this is a quote from USA Today. This is actually Stephen King. He said, "The first thing that came into my mind was something my mother used to say. She raised my brother and me alone. We were latchkey kids before there were latchkey kids back in the 50s. She used to say that if you go into a house and you use the bathroom and there's no ring around the toilet, there's a woman around somewhere because men don't do that." Which I think that's accurate.
I think it's accurate too. Yeah.
Flieger?
Is that, wait, just to clarify, so that means it's cleaned? Or the
Yes.
seat is down. Okay, because there's kind of some double negative action there.
Well, you know what the ring is in a toilet, right?
The ring is like the moldy ring when you don't clean your toilet.
Yeah.
Oh, I clean my toilet, but yeah.
Okay.
I
Okay,
guess
I
you
wasn't
don't
sure if
know.
it meant like the
I
toilet
guess I'm
seat.
the only filthy person here. No, I'm just kidding.
Disgusting.
Look, I was young. I was a little boy. Okay. Let's read this quote from the Sarasota Herald Tribune. Jen, will you read this?
It just turned out when we were writing this book, it never even occurred to us all of a sudden the whole question of women's rights and the way men that behave toward women would arise, Stephen said. I think in a way what made us a fortune was that tape of Trump saying, "I grab him by the pussy." It just woke people up in some way.
Yeah.
Yes, it sure did.
Amazing how that's resonated throughout culture.
I know.
Yeah. But also has had such little impact in the grand scheme of things.
Yep.
Well, yeah. Interesting.
Sadly.
The next batch of quotes, these are about collaborating with Owen. And we're also going to talk about their process, but I actually found several quotes about just the idea of how they collaborated and what it was like for father and son to work together. So this is a quote from EW. They did a pretty longish interview with EW. I'd recommend reading it if you're interested in this book. It was probably the most substantive interview I read. "I never said to them, 'This is what I want for you to be. You should follow in my footsteps.' But the house was full of books and it was full of people who wrote stories, so they just came along. To be asked by Owen to collaborate on a book was the greatest thing in the world. You see these signs that say Smith & Sons Hardware or stuff. So sons do follow in their father's footsteps, but in a specialized area of one of my arts, it was very gratifying to me. We really did do it for fun," Owen adds. "We didn't know if it would be any good or that we would be happy with it. I was really excited that we could have this time together to talk and to work on something, even if it was just for a drawer."
That's
It's so
really
cute.
interesting. I know. And I always think when I think about collaborations between Owen and Joe, I think of like King as like this world famous novelist. And like there are these two up and comers who want to work with him. And so he's kind of like, yeah, I guess I'll take you on for this project. And that kind of flipped the understanding. It's like, no, I want to work with my sons. And maybe the sons were like, not right now, Dad. I'm working on my own thing. So that's really interesting to hear how excited he was to work with his sons. And it's like a family tradition kind of thing, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'm very, the term Nepo baby comes up a lot. And I think Owen is aware that he could be labeled as that. But
Well, that's why
with
Joe
certain-
went by Joe Hill. He didn't
Yeah.
want to be known as a king.
But with like certain art, especially I should say athletes, I'm always amazed because at least with athletics, you're given sort of a genetic predisposition. But beyond that, there is a nurture element. And if you look at like Steph Curry, his dad was a professional baseball pitcher and now he plays basketball. But he said he grew up in a locker room around men and would see like, when do you get ready for the game? When do you start raising the intensity and a lot of this stuff. So I can imagine, whether he has a mental predisposition to be a good author, but being surrounded just in that environment, you can only imagine how many books Stephen King is been mailed every month since he got into writing, right? Everyone wants him to read every single thing they have. So the house just must feel awesome, like this old library. And I couldn't imagine not having some interest in that. And it does sound like, too, that King didn't really push him in that direction, because he says how he was excited when Owen approached him about the project.
Yeah, it just reminds me, like, when I was a kid, I was so desperate to get my hands on books, but we didn't really have many in the house. I had to, like, dig around my mom's closet to find, like, old Dean Koontz novels, and that's, like, because I just wanted to read stuff for adults,
Yeah.
And I read, and she had Anne Rice and she had Dean Koontz, and that was, like, what got me going. Julia, will you read this next quote from The Guardian? This actually dovetails nicely with what we were just talking about.
Despite his dad being on board, Owen had misgivings. I was wary of somebody reading the book and being able to say, Owen wrote this and Stevie wrote that. We have somewhat different styles, and I didn't think that it was going to reflect well on me. His books have sold millions, and I didn't want people to say, this part is great because Steven wrote it, and this part isn't so great because Owen wrote it. I just didn't think I would get a fair look, Yeah, I mean, when I was doing My Dollar Baby, I Know What You Need, I had to write interim scenes, and I felt the same way. I was like, people are going to be like, oh God, he didn't write that. That's totally not his voice. Like, it's that same fear of being like, no, he's genius. I'm just like mere mortal. I am of nowhere near that.
Right.
I don't feel there's like a flip-floppy in style or anything in the book where I'm like, oh, that this doesn't feel like Stephen King at any point to me.
I don't either. I actually forgot that Owen was collaborating, like, until I started thinking about the episode,
Yeah, I think if there's any, and we can talk more about this later, I think that if there's any sort of like I think in terms of the bigger picture, you can see that maybe this would have come together differently under just Stephen King. But in terms of the actual prose, and they actually talk about this in the process, that they really made pains to make sure that their voices were well filtered, like throughout each of their sections. They talk about how they did a lot of rewriting of each other, which is really funny to like imagine Stephen King gives you something. I mean, he's your dad. It's probably a little easier, but like just rewriting Stephen King. I mean, like, no, this is actually a better sentence than what you wrote. It's like kind of funny. And so, but it reminds me of what him and Straub used to do too, to some degree. They also rewrote each other, but they would also, I think, leave sections for each other, or leave say like, hey, will you write this line of dialogue like in this section? And they would also try to trick they would make, like, Straub would take on Kingian sort of tropes in his sections, and King would do that with Straub as well, which is really fun. I think King's always very interested with that collaboration of not wanting people to see the bifurcation.
Yeah, and it's funny because Chismarg is an entirely different approach. Which, can I read this next quote on the process, and then I'll bring up the Chismar approach.
Yeah, I'll just say the last quote in this section is just repeating what I said earlier, which is Owen saying, I basically got to have a year-long conversation with my dad, and he added that, it's uncommon for a 40-year-old man with his own family to be able to spend that much time with his own father. So I think like that element of it made me like the book a little bit more in a weird way, just because I think I could see the love, and that was kind of sweet. So, all right, these next batch of quotes are about the process. Flieger, do you want to read Stephen King and I'll read Owen King?
Sure.
Okay.
So Stephen King said in regards to the process, now when we read the book, it's hard for us to remember who wrote what. I've collaborated before. When Peter Straub and I wrote The Talisman and Black House, we started with an outline. He would write and then I would write. It was like playing tennis. But when Owen and I wrote, Owen proposed the idea that if I was writing a section, I would leave a donut hole, an empty place in the middle of it. And then when he went on to the next section, he'd fill it.
You tell me what you wanted, or I would tell you what I wanted in that space. And that was to throw off anybody who was naughty enough to try to figure out who wrote what. And then ultimately, we rewrote each other quite a lot. There are a few sequences that are so good, only I could have written them, but mostly we rewrote each other. We ended up with this third voice, that's both of us. I think Owen was being a little cheeky in that quote. Jen?
And then Stephen King would go on to say, I've heard there's this new podcast called The Losers Club where they're going to start analyzing the text. And one day they may be trying to figure out who wrote what section. So we got to throw them off the set.
I think we're pretty naughty. I'd go with that.
Oh, absolutely. I think we pride ourselves on being naughty.
But I like well, speaking of naughty, this naughty tennis match that him and Peter had versus the naughty filling of the donut with him and his son. In the third style would be the Richard Chismar, though, which was more of like a text email chain conversation. It really did seem like one of them worked completely independent, and they would leave like a little bit of a end for the other one to finish. So it was a little more letter in a bottle or
Yeah.
message in a bottle, whereas Strobe, the active tennis match trying to imitate each other. But the donut hole, I've never heard of this, how it was described, and it wasn't until the end of the novel when I read Owen's comments. And I was like, that's actually kind of a very like apt way of putting this. And it also is a good way of kind of creating you think of like a sequence of chains interlocking to kind of disguise who's the actual author behind each sentence. So I thought that was kind of a cool way to describe it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like a cohesive story too. Like you're not going off into a vastly different direction than the other person. And it's not like it's not going to be pulling against each other.
Yeah. It's funny. I remember when I was in college, we used to do, we did a lot of like short form video through these various websites. And like one of them was called Film Fights. Maybe there's some Film Fights fans out there, but we used to make these short things, and then you'd make a movie in a week, and then people would vote, on all the submissions and stuff like that. And but we tried to do this long form project where all these different filmmakers we knew, we would make a section, they would make the next section, they would make the next section, or, they would pass it on, and it would be sort of a chain letter to see where the story would go. But then these one guys like totally derailed it because we had like kind of a cohesive story happening. And then they were just like, okay, we're going to derail it. And they're going to go to this like island filled with fancy lads or something like that. It was like such a ridiculous deviation that totally derailed the story. And like, I'm sure they thought it was funny. And, but it was like, that's not how collaboration works. You can't just like do a hard right turn. You have to slowly turn if you want to do that. You know what I mean?
By the way, it just becomes an exquisite corpse at that point, which it's like a Mad Libs almost.
Yeah, exactly. Julia, do you want to read this next quote from the Sarasota Herald Tribune?
Stephen says, I'd have it for 3 or 4 weeks, and he'd have it for maybe 3 or 4 weeks, or maybe a little bit longer. He's a slower composer than I am, but he's very, very good, very sharp, very funny. Nobody's as fast as you, Stephen King. Oh my God.
I was about to say that.
I know.
It is funny because he is very
as him.
competitive, even with his own characters. Like I think it was Insomnia, or no, Bag of Bones, when he talks about like, oh yeah, he was big and tall and famous writer, not as famous as I was, mind you, but it's like even his fictional characters can't compete, so his son has no chance of escaping his shadow.
Yeah. Okay, this is from EW. I'll read this one. There were things that I didn't expect, but that's the fun of it, man, Steven says. It's like going along the road and finding things that are valuable. You think you're exploring a little cave, and then you find an opening, and there's a huge cave behind it. Does that make sense? I totally understand what you mean, Pop. And I think that was what happened, Owen says. We didn't exactly know what was going to happen in the second half of the book until we got pretty deep into that first half, and then it all snapped into focus. Sometimes they deliberately wrote sadistic cliffhangers for the other to resolve, a sort of dare or challenge as they handed back the book. Owen says his father never failed to keep the plot from plummeting into the abyss. Every once in a while, there'd be something like, I know what's got to happen here, but I don't know how the fuck I would write this, Owen says. And he always could. It's like this guy that builds the hot rods in their barns and then go driving them at 200 miles an hour on the salt flats. My dad's got that. He's got a barn full of tools that he's going to find a way to put together and get us out of there. And as someone who's been writing a book for the last couple of years, I will just say that would be really fucking useful if I had Stephen King at my disposal to write the next scene that I have no idea how to do. But I think that's part of the joy of writing. So I just thought that was kind of sweet. So all in all, it took them about 16 months to write the book, with 10 months to write the initial draft. So it was basically, they described it as 10 months was, the real writing. And before that, they said it took about 1 or 2 months to write the TV episodes. And then there was about 6 months, or maybe about like 4 or 5 months on the tail end. That was, revisions and things of that nature. So yeah, that's interesting. And it's funny because I feel like that is slower than King typically works. You know what I mean?
700 pages though.
I know.
That's true. It is super long.
Yeah.
Do you wonder if he was working on other stuff while
sure
while Owen was writing? I wonder what else.
I would imagine that he's got he's bouncing around a lot. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm sure he's
Well,
like
if he's sending it off for 3 or
Yeah.
4 weeks, and then he's waiting, then he's got to be working on something else while he's waiting for Owen to do his stuff.
And he has talked about like rewriting in the morning, like writing in the morning and rewriting in the afternoon. So like he was probably finishing some stuff too. So
Yeah,
interesting.
my theory is that like he he might spend like Monday and Tuesday on what he really is interested in. Wednesday, maybe revising something he's less interested in, and then new projects Thursday and Friday. That's just how I've always imagined him writing.
Yeah.
Just purely
like
speculation.
your little imaginary schedule for Stephen
know.
King in your
Yeah.
head. That's so
Like,
cute.
I wonder what King's doing right now, other than like walking his dogs. But
And then Short Story Saturday.
Yeah. Oh, I
free
like
for
that.
all.
So then they also visited a women's prison, which I'm glad to hear they did, because for a while
Yeah.
I was like, I think this whole book is just inspired by him watching Orange is the New Black.
Yep.
Because he was obsessed with that show. But yeah, they did go and visit a women's prison. Let's do a little reading here. Dan, why don't you read Owen? And Jen, why don't you read Stephen? I'm switching you guys up from last time.
Uh-oh.
So Owen said, "We did end up touring a women's prison called Gulf State in Gulftown, New Hampshire. The warden took us around and we saw the grounds and got a feeling for how the inmates lived.
We learned what the routine was, and we saw what they called the soft room, where women go who are agitated have to go. We also found out about the delousing process and other intake procedures. We saw the library. We saw some of the places where the women work. For me, visiting the prison really energized the process."
I think that's usually what research does. Probably 10% of the things that we learned made their way into the book, but knowing the other 90% made it possible for us to feel confident writing."
And then they also talked about this in EW. Stephen says, "We went to a women's prison in New Hampshire. In any of those fantasy movies where you have a prison filled with these gorgeous women with great hair, we found out that wasn't the case. A lot of the women there just seem to be working through their time and not very happy about it, but doing what they have to do. We tried to put that in the book and make that prison as realistic as possible. I'm sure that a lot of people who staff women's prisons will say we got this wrong and we got that wrong, but I'm hoping that we got the flavor right." Yeah, and we wanted to respect people's experiences, Owen says. It's something that we cared a lot about getting right as much as we possibly could. And of course, fiction takes its own path, but we tried to stay true, even though the book is a fable. And then I also wanted to talk about comparisons to The Stand, which obviously I was thinking about. I'm sure you guys were all thinking about as we were reading. And then Owen actually addressed it in the interview at the back of the book. Julia, will you read this?
I'd have liked to have do more on the beginnings of our government that formed our place. We gestured at the shape of how decisions were made, of shared responsibilities taken on, but we definitely didn't get into the weeds the way we might have. I just reread The Stand for the first time in at least 20 years, and everything about the formation of a governmental apparatus by the Boulder Group was really interesting. Stu and Glenn and the others take a fairly devious approach to building consensus. My sense is that things played out in different ways in our place. Might have made for an interesting contrast for the long-time readings of your books, don't you think, Dad? Which is not to say that our place was some sort of utopia and the women who lived there were perfect community stewards who seamlessly elected the most selfless public officials. I just know it worked differently than it did in Boulder in The Stand. I had actually not been thinking of The Stand reading this.
Interesting.
Was I the only one?
Yeah, how about you,
everybody
Jen?
else?
Flieger, were you thinking about The Stand at all?
Yeah, I definitely have The Stand in my notes.
Yeah, I was.
Yeah.
More so than Under the Dome, I think.
Yeah. See, I think, maybe thinking of Dome more.
Yeah, me too.
But Stand to me, and I know you were thinking about it, Jen, because you love them community meeting notes. So,
Yes, I sure do.
but I think but we'll talk more about that later, because actually some of my favorite stuff in this book is related to things that I also love about The Stand, and I think any good post-apocalyptic fiction is the ways in which people's roles in society can change so drastically. Mm-hmm. And once the old strictures are gone. And I think that's always such a fascinating theme. And we do get a lot of that here. And so I want to talk more about that. So they set the book in Appalachia, which, is interesting. I think if there's one thing I've noticed as we read these Latter-day King books, is I just miss Maine.
Yes.
Me too.
I know. And I think, but they actually address that here in this Scribner interview. So Owen says, "I think that Appalachia made a lot of sense for us as a setting because the book is very of the moment in certain ways. And if you think about it, Appalachia is sort of at the heart of a lot of things that are happening in our country right now. It's a place that's been economically and environmentally ravaged. There's a terrible epidemic of opioid addiction there, and the political system hasn't been able to help Appalachia. But at the same time, it's one of the most beautiful places in our nation. And there's this juxtaposition between how people are struggling there and how beautiful it is. It made sense for the book, which has a lot of environmental themes." And then Stephen added that they wanted to find a neutral ground to merge their sensibilities. And Owen added, "Maine has suffered enough."
That's funny. Is this the first, because it's West Virginia, is this the first since Firestarter that takes place in Appalachia?
I think so.
I think no, I think Green Mile takes place kind of close to this area. I think it's like a southern prison. I'm pretty sure it's not in Maine.
Let me look that up,
Interesting.
actually. Now I'm like,
And
Yeah,
I
'cause
know
I-
that where they filmed it is in Tennessee, but I can't remember exactly where it's set. I'm
Well, they got them
pretty sure that
accents,
it's
though.
southern. Yeah, well, yeah,
Georgia-
they got them accents.
wait, I think it's in Georgia.
Georgia, that's right. Yeah, so around that area, that's I don't know.
Interesting.
Appalachia is a kind of
Yeah, Appalachia is very
nebulous
strange.
place.
I've had a friend he went through a divorce and he decided to go walk the Appalachian Trail, which I always thought was like a very interesting thing to do.
It's very wild,
But
of
also
him.
very strange and dangerous at times.
Yeah.
I've never
Well, that
been
goes
there.
all the way up to Maine. It's really pretty. We just walked a little bit of it when we were at the Great Smoky Mountains. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I don't consider myself from Appalachia, but I'm very close to it, and I've spent a lot of time there. And I agree with everything he wrote there. Like it's a really strange place, but it is gorgeous. And there's a lot of fucked up shit that happens there. And a lot of people don't care about the people of Appalachia. So it is
Right.
nice to have it set there. But I agree with you. I miss Maine, and I think I would have preferred this set in Maine.
Yeah, there's just because, we just went through the Mercedes books, and that's kind of set in the Midwest. And I think there's definitely a little bit more personality in this book in terms of the setting. I think that's what I struggled with a lot in Mercedes, was feeling disconnected from the setting, which is not something I'm used to in King. And so yeah, Jen, you look like you want to say something.
I do. Yeah. I think I feel a little too connected to this setting.
yeah.
I've have talked about my Southern self-loathing. I think I have a real aversion to like Southern drag or like really heavy Southern accents. Like it's part of what keeps me from really climbing on board with Rob Zombie stuff, And,
Well, that's-
there
they're
are
on,
a lot of reasons.
Yeah, they're in
but-
the South on the moon over there.
That's
Yeah.
exactly. That's not the
Dueling
South.
Banjos was not your wedding dance? Is that
Well, my first one, but you got to marry your cousin to.
And you had said
I
that
shouldn't joke.
you had mentioned the audiobook kind of put you off.
It did, and I wonder if that's why I don't know. I just had a hard time connecting with some of these characters because I did listen to the audiobook. It was good, but there are some really heavy Southern accents in here, specifically Angel, and it drove me bananas. It's not that the Southern accent was bad, because I do get really persnickety when a Southern accent is bad, but it was so thick. And I wonder if that came out as y'all were reading it, not hearing it.
Yeah, see, I didn't hear it like that, or read it like that. But if I had listened to the audiobook, I can imagine it would have gotten on my nerves a little bit.
Oh, like, we're in a prison, y'all. Let's go get them bars or something. It was just
There's a lot of
so
yeehaws
over the
happening in
top.
my head as I read it.
Yes.
Cotton Eye Joe song playing the whole time.
Yeah, the whole
No,
just the beat in the
unless-
background.
Unless something's written in an accent, I don't read it in an accent.
Right.
Yeah.
So I don't think about them having accents in this,
Well,
even though, unless it's like Train Spotting, where I'm like, I have to read this in a
Yeah,
Scottish
where-
accent. I don't have a
it's
choice.
Phonetic.
Yeah.
But I would say, have you guys seen the Wild and Wonderful Whites of West Virginia?
I have. That's a great doc.
It's a really good documentary, but it's very intense, and it's very hard for me to hear West Virginian accents outside of that. And I know those are like an exaggerate. It's like a family of this kind of not country singer, but country dancer that kind of has this very unique style of like Dutch early American tap dancing. But his family now multi-generations in, it's almost like the Hiltons, but the West Virginia version. It's a really good movie. I think Johnny Knoxville
He produced
and
it.
Jeff Tremaine produced it. But once
It's
you hear
really
those
good.
accents, it's hard to get them out of your head. So once I saw West Virginia, it's my prejudicial part of my brain gave the characters that accent. So
Yeah.
But I'm like you, Julia, in that I don't really read it that way until I feel like when we went to Maine for the first time, when I went to Bangor, like that was the first time I'd really been around Mainers, and hearing the accent, like just in the, the slight Maine accent, like in everyday conversation, was a lot different than just hearing it in movies or something like that. And now I feel as if when I read King, I at least have a little bit of a sense of that. Like I remember when I was a kid and I would read King, the AYUH, the Aya, like I never really
Aya?
understood what that was. I knew it was like affirmation or reaction, but I never really knew how to pronounce it properly until, I think I heard it in some stuff, but it still didn't really land until I actually talked to a lot of people in Maine. So yeah. Jen?
Well, and it's interesting too because I love King's Maine folksiness. Like I'm thinking of Pet Sematary, I'm thinking of Mrs. Todd's Shortcut. There are so many of his stories where that comes out, like the frog eating one. Rainy Season too is another one that has this really delightful Maine twang to it, and that's something King has grown up around. And I wonder if there's just kind of an artificial feeling here to me because he gets most of it right. There's nothing really that stood out as wrong to me. It just felt very thick and forced and not necessarily authentic, if that makes sense.
Well, there's a difference, I think, between when people who have really spent time and lived in those areas write about it versus if the majority of your experience with it is like from the TV or from movies or something like
Which
that,
is why I think I would just have preferred this be written in Maine because if it's going to be folksy, I'd rather it be that kind of folksy. But again, that could be my version.
I could weigh in with, and I'm sure Julia with California and me for New York, you usually get like an exaggerated, like, hey, I'm walking here, like that kind of thing. And in California, it's the Californians SNL sketch. So everyone's always like, oh, that's not quite right. But maybe that is how we can't see it because we're so in it,
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's interesting. I don't really have that because I'm from Michigan and we don't have culture. So I'm just kidding. We have maple syrup. Okay, so and fudge if you go up to Mackinac.
Ooh.
Okay. On G.I. Joe, this is just a fun story. Doesn't really have any bearing on the book, but I wanted to just read through it really quick. Because this was in the EW piece, and I never knew this before. So Sleeping Beauties may be the first book they've co-authored, but as mentioned above, it's not technically Stephen and Owen's first professional collaboration. That honor belongs to Crystal Ball, a villainous G.I. Joe character they concocted together back in the mid-'80s when Owen was a 9-year-old. Stephen wrote down a pitch and sent it to Hasbro, which mass-produced the toy in 1987 and put him in the Marvel Comics. It's true, Owen says, sounding a little bit chagrined and handing the credit or blame off to his dad. I think that he's much better suited to explain because I think my contribution to the creative element was more limited to being like, yeah, Dad, that sounds awesome. Oh, I mean, that is such bullshit, Stephen King replies. It was his idea. He had all the G.I. Joes and we watched it on TV and we read the comic books. Stephen has pretty specific recall on that day. He says it was winter, snowy outside, and the two were going around the wide yard on cross-country skis. He said, Dad, it would be great if there was a G.I. Joe who could read minds. And I said, oh yeah, that would be really great. What would you call a character like that? And Owen said, Crystal Ball. The character has a lenticular holographic shield and looks a little like Vincent Price crossed with Paulie Walnuts from The Sopranos. And when I looked at that, that is dead on.
Yeah.
And I did remember this character, actually. I was never a big G.I. Joe head, but I'm pretty sure my friend had this action figure.
Yeah, I definitely did. And it's funny because when I was thinking about like the Paulie Walnuts, he has like the Wolverine wings, but outward, but they're gray like Paulie. So I looked up the character bio because I have not thought of this toy since the 80s. But, he derives his powers from European mysticism and is reputed to be the love child of a Romanian man with psychic powers and an American woman from Bangor, Maine.
Wow.
What?
Wow.
A little nod.
So,
Tabby.
Little nod.
Tabby stepping
Stephen King
out.
got it in there, yeah.
I love that. I mean, that is like Richie Rich type shit. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like just the idea that you can think of a G.I. Joe character and your dad can make a phone call and then it actually manifests.
It's like every kid's dream. And it's funny that to see when Stephen King, when you do take advantage of celebrity, it's like, my son wants this toy. I'm going to lean into frame a little bit here, but good for him.
Totally.
Yeah.
No, I mean, that seems like a pretty harmless act. It's just really sweet.
Yeah.
Okay, let's read some reviews. Overall, this one was not particularly well reviewed, which is what I recalled from the time. But we'll start with some positive ones. Julia, will you read the sections I pulled from the Guardian review?
It's a bulging, colorful epic, a supersized happy meal, liberally salted with supporting characters and garnished with splashes of arterial ketchup. Sleeping Beauty is, as its most satisfying during its breakneck opening half, as a crisis take hold before the allegorical baggage piles up. One of King Senior's great strengths as a writer is his mastery of the milieu of small-town USA, his uncanny ability to ventriloquize its inhabitants and keep his myriad pieces in play. His tale only falters when it doubles down on its premise, belatedly introducing a parallel Dooling, a shadow world for the sleeping woman that is so much better than the old man-driven one. Perhaps it's no accident that this epic feels so vital and fresh. Sleeping Beauties comes fueled by a youthful vigor that King Senior hasn't shown us in years. Probably not since 2008's Duma Key. He appears to have lost interest, dozed off, when maybe all he required was his son's intervention. I like the image of Owen peeling back the cocoon, jolting his insensible father back into murderous, bloody life. I think that's kind of harsh. It's kind of harsh.
I think,
Say
well,
he's
and that's funny
dozed off.
this is the good review.
Right.
But no, I was surprised by that too, because, and I've actually, when I think back on the Mercedes episodes, I feel like a lot of people were saying that about those books, about like, oh, like Stephen King's back, you know, like he's woken up.
Yeah.
I feel like there's a lot of that discourse around this latter period, but it's it's for a lot of different books. Like, I mean, I remember Janet Maslin at the New York Times said the same thing about Under the Dome, which was Under the Dome was after Duma Key. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Or was it before?
I'm pretty
I
sure
feel
it was
like they
after.
were okay.
Because Duma Key was like the end of his accident recovery cycle.
Yes. So, but Under the Dome to me has that youthful vigor. I mean, it's a little long.
Exactly.
So I don't know.
Yeah, I think Wendy has it too. I think a
Yeah.
lot of it has it.
Well,
Yeah.
and I think-
also disagree with the fact that the double dueling is the slow part.
we'll talk
I was
about
like,
that.
No.
Well, the thing is, there's a lot of not contradiction, but like there's a lot of disagreement in the reviews. There, a lot of them say that the first half is the rougher part and the latter half is a lot stronger. You know, I was like reading a lot of these different things, and I think it's similar with all these people saying, having different opinions on what has brought Stephen King back from being snoozy or whatever. And the question, and I think the thing is, he never really was snoozy. He was just doing different things. I mean, that doesn't mean that I like every book of this latter period, but I don't think, as somebody who has like really been nose deep in this stuff, I really don't think that there was ever like the sense that he lost his touch. You know what I mean? Even if I wasn't that into the stories he was telling. I'll leave it at that. Okay.
Yeah.
Next one is from the Tampa Bay Times. Jen, will you read this excerpt?
Yes. Sleeping Beauties is the first published collaboration between father and son. Whatever the co-writing process might have been, it produced a seamless, scary, and satisfying story. In Sleeping Beauties, the dynamics of male-female relationships are at the core of the disaster. What the men left behind must do is interpret what Aurora means. What caused the outbreak? What happens to the women while they sleep? Will they ever return? And what will happen if they do? Sleeping Beauties has myriad subplots, all reverberating with that theme of gender relationships and a large cast. The character list at the beginning of the book is 3.5 pages long. But the Kings keep all that machinery running fast and smooth, creating an all too credible picture of a world engulfed by a disaster for which absolutely no one is prepared. Despite its 702 pages, I rushed through it headlong.
So those are the better reviews. The New York Times was actually pretty savage. I have a quote from it that I'm saving for the hook, but this is from Janet Maslin, who, especially with Under the Dome, became one of King's like biggest supporters, I think, in his latter period.
Yeah.
She was very much on board with a lot of his later work, and I think was really interested in helping to refurbish the sort of the way the snootier crowd looked at him in the 80s, you know? The idea that what he wrote was lowbrow. Janet Maslin, I think, was very interested as one of the lead, writers at the New York Times in being like, let's give Stephen King the credit he deserves. I give her credit for that, but she did not like this book. She said, like Under the Dome, Sleeping Beauties is straightforwardly written. There are no long, dreamy passages in italics here. That's the good news. The less happy news is that this co-authored book is sleepy in its own right. It, too, has a lot of characters, but very few of them spring to life, and many of them seem repetitive. Without the speculating on what the father-son writing process was like, it feels as though some kind of politesse? Kept this this is where my my lack of a Ivy League education is hurting me. It feels as though some kind of politesse kept this 700-page book from being usefully tightened. I actually think that might be kind of true, you know? It's hard when you're writing with someone. Go ahead, Julia.
Well, I just think if you're no constant reader would say the no long dreamy passages in italics here. That's the good news. No, I would never say that. That's some of my favorite stuff.
I
actually agree
the fact
with
that
you.
he can, and like that's some of what I love about him is he's able to do that and not make it seem pretentious or anything like it's something that's a really great device. And so if she doesn't like that, I feel like she doesn't get what Stephen King is in the first place.
That's interesting.
Snap, take that, Janet Maslin.
Take that, Janet Maslin.
Me out.
Go back to Yale. Okay. Flieger, read this section read these excerpts from the Washington Post. This is also not a very kind review.
Although Sleeping Beauties offers glimpses of trouble around the world, riots in Washington, a downed jet, etc., the story was focused on Dooling, particularly the women's penitentiary, where prisoners are quickly succumbing to the Aurora flu. But before these inmates go gentle into the gooey night, we get to know several of them: lonely souls, abused girlfriends, unstable killers with hearts of gold. It's a very special edition of Orange is the New Black Death. Oh. The story is flecked with the gossamer wings of fairy tales that fall awkwardly in the contemporary setting. More than 70 characters rage and snore through these pages. They're all listed at the front of the book, and feature that is unintentionally effective of making the cast feel even more bewildering. Stephen King, the author of more than 50 best-selling novels, and Owen, whose debut novel, Double Features, premiered in 2013, can also be wonderful writers, but this yawning collaboration doesn't bring out the best in either of them. The pacing in the first 300 pages is deadly, and not in a good way.
I agree.
Yeah. So, did they call it the Aurora flu in the book?
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes. I think eventually they just called it Aurora.
Okay, I don't remember the flu, but
The
I was
writer's getting a little cheeky too with like the references to sleeping and snoring, which is fine, but it can get a little bit.
Tone it down.
Also, like some of it is like word count when it's like Stephen King, author of more than 50 novels. It's like, yeah, as if thank you for bringing that to our attention, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Julia, will you read this this excerpt from Tor.com's review?
A long, long novel that places a vast cast of characters at the mercy of a speculative premise, a sleeping sickness that knocks all of the women of the world out for the count, leaving the men to fend for themselves. It's Under the Dome Part 2. In other words, except this time, the constant writer has roped one of his sons in on the fun. As tough as it is to tell where one king ends and the other begins, Sleeping Beauties is such a slog that it hardly matters. Neither this doorstopper of a novel's authors had ever been much for subtlety, but in this instance, a little thought about something other than the plot may have gone a long way. A tedious read, full of gratuitous shooting and shouting, but empty in every other sense. It's such a big book that you'd be forgiven for thinking there's a lot going on, but there's not.
Ooh.
Ouch.
Okay, one more. And this one I think will lead into our discussion, our general discussion of the hook. This is from the Chicago Tribune. King fans who crack open Sleeping Beauties may be disappointed. The book lacks the page-turning intensity found in so many of his classics. Father and son started with an intriguing premise. What if men and women were separated into two different worlds? Would the men freak out? Would the women create a kinder, gentler society? There are existential questions that would seem to lend themselves to a 700-page book, but the novel's answers to both don't seem nuanced enough. Evie is certainly the most intriguing character, but her existence is explained away as supernatural. She's been sent to Earth, we're told, but by whom and why? The Kings let those questions linger and instead focus on the men who want to kill Evie versus the men who want to save her. King fans who enjoy his blunt language and vivid gore will find lots to like. In the end, though, the novel feels like it wanted to say something really meaningful about gender relations and settles instead for, can't we all just get along? And I think that is an interesting way to lead in. But before we do that, I want to read a quick synopsis. This is from StephenKing.com. In a future so real and near it might be now, something happens when women go to sleep. They become shrouded in a cocoon-like gauze. If they are awakened, if the gauze wrapping their bodies is disturbed or violated, the women become feral and spectacularly violent. And while they sleep, they go to another place. The men of our world are abandoned, left to their increasingly primal devices. One woman, however, the mysterious Evie, is immune to the blessing or curse of the sleeping disease. Is Evie a medical anomaly to be studied, or is she a demon who must be slain? and that's Sleeping Beauties. All right, let's head on into the hook.
Ah, yes. Don't you see? Don't you see how clear it all is? Not only can you see the future, I can change it. You can change it, exactly.
Here in the hook, we talk about the themes, the broader ideas, and generally our reaction and our thoughts about these. I described, basically when I was thinking about the hook, I described this book as a gender-specific riff on The Leftovers, or if you like, the Left Behind series. Where my Christians at? This book asks 2 questions. How might a community of men react if women vanished from the world? And what might a society started and cultivated by women look like? And I think an interesting question to kick this off is, which of these 2 questions interested you more? Where in this book did you find yourself leaning in? Where did you find yourself losing interest? Flieger, I'm going to start with you. The boys are going to kick this one off.
Hell yeah.
Which of these 2 sort of realities did you find yourself being more interested in?
I guess it was more the vanishing from the world, because there were elements of this that also reminded me of Children of Men, which is when children stop being born. But what does that do to... Oh, that's such a good movie.
I know.
It's like a perfect movie.
Top 10. But you just start to see like these kind of existential crises happening that you wouldn't necessarily expect. And it's like, what is the point of living, in a way? And I don't know that this novel gets as deep into that. It's a little more reactionary. But I would have rather have seen like more the philosophical implications. Instead, it seemed to be just like behavioral, like it would just, people would immediately kind of act out. So I was a little disappointed in that.
That's an interesting read on that. Yeah.
But I was like trying to think too of like throughout history, like when women have run societies, and it's like, it's not always peaceful. I mean, like Margaret Thatcher went to war with the Falkland Islands, let's not forget. And, you know,
I mean,
so
Kamala Harris ran her campaign on, I'm going to build the most lethal military.
Right. But I do think the novel captures, though, the element of, you know, the inherent violence of a man, which I think maybe exists in all humans. But when you couple that with size and some of like the, you know, the excuses for behavior that men can get away with sometimes, you know, like boys being boys, it is very like interesting to think about.
Yeah, I definitely
got there or not.
Yeah, I want to talk more about those ideas specifically shortly. Julia, the which side of this story, was it the women or the men that drew you more in?
I was equally interested in both sides. And, you know, what I mentioned earlier, like the kind of the things that I hadn't really thought about before, that is embarrassing to say that I hadn't really thought about, is how many women are in prison because of a man. And I was like, oh, hadn't thought about that. And that's valid. And I had honestly, crazy to say it, I had honestly never considered a world without men before. Like that never crossed my mind before. And I'd never been like, oh, what if there were no men? And I'd be like, oh. Like just and it was really the Elaine talks about Nana can walk home at night in our place because she doesn't have to worry about anything. And I was like, oh man, I'd never thought about what if I could just walk home and I didn't have to worry about anything. And I was never scared. And like, if there's a dude who's like, you know, half a block behind me, like I don't have to be like constantly like checking him out, because that's just how it is, right? And like, and so it's embarrassing to say that I'd never considered that, because that seems like that's a pretty basic thing to think about. But I think if nothing else, they made me consider that with this novel, and I was like, well, you did more than you probably considered that you would, and like, so like these are the questions that they're wanting to make you think about, and so there is. And there's a quote, if I may, by Howland, who is the history professor who in the book, and he's talking about people who would work next to machines with cool water to heat when they got too hot, that they would cool the machine off. And he says, I submit that women have historically served the same function, restraining men, at least when possible, from their very worst, most abhorrent behavior. I was like, I kind of see that, where like women are this kind of like buffer of, please don't kill each other. Like...
Yeah, kill us instead, you know?
Yeah, Jen, what were you drawn to while reading this?
Well, okay, it's interesting the way, I think you're correct in the way you framed the 2 questions that this book asks. But for me, the question has always been, should men exist, you know? And is that what we're considering? And that is what I think is the most interesting thing about this book. That's what really, really draws me in. And I think I am much more interested in what a society started and cultivated by women would look like than what would happen if women exist, or if women just disappeared. Because I think for me, the answer is easy. Men would kill each other and eventually die out. Like, men cannot exist without women, I don't think. And so as I'm reading this, I'm thinking, what would it be like? What would I do if I were asked this question? And then I start thinking, because I get criticism a lot of times that because I am so overtly feminist that I must hate men. And that's not what feminism is. Feminism is not women controlling men. We're not advocating for matriarchies, even though that would be really cool. And I do argue for that a lot. But feminism is more of a human argument, and we should all have equality. We should be on equal footing. We should make decisions. So I think a lot of this is more what happens when women disappear from a patriarchy, and what does a culture that is not formed around a patriarchy look like? And because what's interesting is there are men born into the other side. Like, there are baby boys, and the women protect their younger children when they're awakened from their cocoon. So there's this idea that boys or children who have not existed long enough in a world dominated by patriarchy can change it. But can men who have tasted patriarchy ever go back? You know, and I'm thinking of like Ken in the Barbie movie. Like, once you get a taste of this unchecked power, would you ever voluntarily give it up? Or will it take women destroying everything to finally reclaim our own power? And that's what I think is really interesting. And like I think one of the reviews said, I don't know if we get to an answer, but it made me think a lot about this. And what do I actually want a world without men, even though I am so fucking pissed off at men right now, present company excluded.
Thank you.
Thank you.
But so I've just been thinking
Wait
about
till you find out
that a
who I
lot.
voted for. I'm totally kidding.
God.
I'm totally kidding. No. Okay. I love that read on it because I think that's a very nuanced read on it. And I think it's actually perhaps more generous to the book than what the book actually does. But you added a question, Jen, to the outline. You said, do we have an issue with the gender essentialism? And I think that's like a question I was also trying to articulate that I couldn't. And I'd love to hear you talk about what prompted you to add that.
Well, okay, not to get too personal, but there's somebody in my life who is currently considering what pronouns they're going to use. So this is something that has just been on my mind a lot. And as I was reading this book, I started thinking, okay, well, where would they land? You know, and I have a lot of trans friends and a lot of friends I really care about who identify as a gender that they were not assigned at birth. So I started thinking, I think we just don't live in a world anymore where it is that clearly black and white. And I think in 2017, trans people have always existed, let me be very clear, but I think we've started talking about this a lot more openly since 2017. So I'm not necessarily knocking the book. And I think when we're playing with these kind of gender archetypes, we do have to kind of be essentialist. Mm-hmm. But it just surprises me for a book that seems to consider every single option or every single inevitability that would happen because of this allegory they've created, that doesn't seem to ever really come into play. There don't seem to be any trans characters in this book.
Oh, no, I think that was really interesting to me. And I remember hearing critiques of that when the book first came out. Mm-hmm. But I think that you're asking the wrong guys to write that book.
I agree.
And I think that they understood that and basically said, like, we'll throw a gay guy in there, but that's all we're really going to do, you know? And that's fine. I don't need them to cover all those bases. But I think I said this to you when we were texting Jen. I go, I think these two guys writing this book, it's almost a trap. Like, this premise is really compelling, but it also opens up so many doors. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you guys can tell a good story, but are you capable of peeking your head through each of those doors? And I think the answer is like, no. And that doesn't mean that they have to do that. But the thing is, if you don't tell a satisfying story, people are going to start asking, well, what could have made it more satisfying? And, you know, some people, I'm not saying that this book is inherently unsatisfying. There are parts of it I did find satisfying. I'm just saying that I think that this book was had too many open questions and loose threads in terms of how it's exploring these really complex dynamics that it was inevitable that people were going to start asking them. And, you know, I think maybe losing, I don't know how to phrase this, maybe throwing out the baby with the bathwater to some degree.
Yeah. Well, I think, and I like the points that Jen brought up, and it would have been nice to see this along a much longer timeline, because I think the book is only about a week, right? And I think Under the Dome is similar, where you see this very rapid, almost like symbolic deterioration of the societies, versus a stand novel where you have, you know, the different regions, the good and the evil, building up slowly over time. You can actually start to see some of the ramifications and spend time with the details. Because you're right, like it doesn't even hit on a lot of these gender issues that could be explored. And you wonder if they kept it contained as sort of a protection for the authors, being like, this, we're going to start going into deep water that we've never navigated and we don't know how to. But by doing that, you also leave a lot on the table where it's like, well, no, there's a lot more I'd like to see explored here. You know, whether it's even getting into like the intersectionality of some of this stuff, right? And there's just like a lot more that it could have been focused on that I would have found more interesting than what we actually got here in the novel.
I agree. But I also think they gave themselves a time limit with this, because you have to believe that some of the women on the other side are still awake.
Right.
Right. So you can only be within 11 days or so, because that's as long as the human body can stay awake. Right. So they have this ramifications. But I feel like if you had half the characters and twice the depth, I think that I would be, I like it very much, but that would kick it up to the next level.
And I would even counter that, because it's supernatural in some ways, you could have them stay awake, you know, that could be handled. But I think that's very well said about the half and twice making this much better.
And that's where, you know, the idea of an open-ended series, right? Like, could have been really cool. But what you said, Julia, was actually one of my favorite parts, is the time limit, because it actually, the women who stay awake, like, that is one of my favorite parts of the book, is the idea of these women being like, but I have so much shit to do before I fall asleep. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I like Lila's whole journey in that regard was really great for me. And same with Van at the end too. Just these ideas of these women who are like, I'm so fucking tired, but let me just do this one last thing. And that's good. That's good, you know, fiction. Jen, why are you scratching your chin?
Because that's just like being a woman.
Yeah.
I think like so much to do and I'm so tired. I just want to stop, you know? Yeah. And I also want to say, like, I don't think that they should not have written this book. Like, I do not believe that men can't tell stories about women.
Right.
Because that would mean that women can't tell stories about men. And I would rather them try and not get all the way there than not explore this at all. Because I do think this is something that King is genuinely curious about.
Yeah.
You can kind of see his treatment. And I've got some more thoughts about race when we get into more character-driven stuff. But I agree with you. I think this feels like it is trying to be a message book. And I think that we are losing some of the enjoyment that really is what gets your message to your audience, because the message is kind of beating me over the head.
And not to take away from Owen, but what if he collaborated with his daughter on this book? Would that be a different story?
That would be interesting.
Or Tabitha.
Yeah.
Or Tabitha, or just, you know, a female author in general who's maybe a little more well-versed in these subject matter.
Hey, or me. Call me up, Steve, next time you got a question.
So now you write Sleeping Princes, and now it's about the men fall asleep, and what do the women do? And there you go.
Oh,
there we
the
go.
women just
They be shopping.
They be shopping.
Oh my God.
So,
Joking.
but no, I think I agree too. Like, it's not as if they shouldn't have written it, but I think that I think that's the reason I called it a trap earlier, is that for all your best intentions, there's going to be a lot of ungenerous reads of the book, and I don't think that is necessarily a bad thing either. It's just it's two dudes who are tiptoeing into very thorny areas, and I do feel as if they were overwhelmed once they got there, because the book really, for me, feels like it kind of ends with a bit of a shrug. That's not to say that there's not satisfying moments, and I'll talk about those, but I do want to just riff on the gender essentialism idea. And I think because I think you articulated extremely well, Jen, the nuanced read on this book that is what helped me I think, find my footing. Because when I'm like really allergic to essentialist thinking in general, I find, my general view of humanity is just very resistant to the idea that you can reduce any group of people to a series of universal traits. I think that that can be very poisonous. But I was kind of sorting through my thoughts, and I said, you can't deny the fact that, the world's institutions were built upon patriarchal ideals. And that it was in that corner of this book that I became a lot more interested, because once the women wake up in what they call our place and they start building society again, and this is what I was talking about earlier with the stand, is they start and they're unshackled from whether it's an unhappy marriage or, a life in prison because of, choices they made when they were young that were, in some instances egged on by the men in their life. Once they were unshackled from those things, you had all these women who were finding new talents, who were making new friends, who were finding themselves in ways that they never had the opportunity to in the other world. And that is one of my favorite themes in post-apocalyptic fiction, which is like, did you guys see A Quiet Place Day One?
Yes.
I really like that for a lot of reasons, but the two leads, bringing them together and what they both represented, they never would have found each other in a pre-apocalyptic world, because there were so many dividers that separated them, with race and class and gender and all these other things. And then when they come together, they end up, taking on completely different roles than they had in the previous world. That to me is extremely satisfying when I see that in fiction. In this book, that's why I think I leaned in most during the kind of cultivation of our place, because I was watching these characters that I was really struggling to get my arms around in the first half of the book. I started suddenly to see this other dimension to them. Like, think about like Anton's mom, Magda, right? This older woman. I thought she was being played for comedy in the first part of the book, and she kind of was. And then suddenly she gets this like really beautiful, like, second act in our place. And the same with several of the prisoners. Suddenly you have these people who are proving themselves extremely useful in society, when in the previous world they weren't taken seriously at all. And that is where I found the most enjoyment in this book, because I'm not interested necessarily in the idea that, a woman, like a society run by women, is inherently kinder or more gentler than one run by men. But because I just don't know if I believe that, because, like Flieger and I said earlier, it's not as if all women are filled with, a gentleness or a kindness, or, and it's not as if all men have that warrior rage inside of them. Like, I know that sounds a little not all men, and this is why it's hard for me to talk about it, because I don't want to sound like one of those guys, but I just reject a lot of that thinking. And it can feel a little bit like, there were moments when I had the feeling where that Stephen and Owen were kind of like the women respecter has logged on, you know what I mean? Where it's just like, I know men are scum. Man, I'm such, like, those guys who kind of overdo it. They're like, I'm such scum. Like, women are so much better. And I always find that a little bit like eye rolly. But when you actually get into what are the institutions that men control that have subjugated women, and what is it like when women are unshackled from them and how they blossom, that to me is very interesting. And that's what I wish we got more of,
Yeah. And I would say also, I think it's interesting, what do men do when they're unshackled from that too? Like, what would an hour place filled with just men look like? And I know I just said that men would kill each other and die out. Like,
well, a lot of them
I'm
probably
kind of
would.
being snarky. They probably would. And I think when you look at this story through the lens of patriarchy rather than the lens of gender essentialism, it becomes a lot easier for me to engage with the concept. Because I agree with you. I don't think men are inherently bad or violent. And I say that because, I've got a son too. I want to protect my daughter, but I also want to teach my son to grow up in a world where he is not limited by these patriarchal expectations. And I think that a lot of what happens after the women fall asleep is this idea of what should men be in a patriarchal world? What are they supposed to be? What are these ideals? And there are a couple of characters that I think push against that, and a lot of them that lean in. And it is so relaxing when we get over to our place, and that just doesn't exist. And they're like, what do I want to do? Oh, it's a beautiful day. That's all I'm going to think about. And then I'm going to go find some food and be nice, you know?
Well, and that's not even just gender. That's like being freed from capitalism, right?
Exactly.
Like, there's a lot. That's,
Yeah. Capitalistic white patriarchal Christianity is a thing.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, I was going to say, it's because I was trying to think of like real world examples, and it usually only exists in fiction, right? You have Lord of the Flies and you have Yellow Jackets. And, you know, those are obviously like literary interpretations. And then you have reality TV shows. You know, I've seen Real Housewives. Is that really a representative nature? You know, that's not, though. That's like
that's real
a
life,
very
man.
heightened, you know, and people trying to get people trying to get noticed. And the only thing I could really come down to was team sports, whether it's a men's team or a women's team. When you have people of the same gender striving toward a common goal, they can achieve things. But unfortunately, that's the only example I could really think of, because we don't really have this control group of, you know, other than maybe ancient times when like certain cultures were predominantly matriarchal. But it still doesn't exist in the vacuum, because you have to deal with, you know, neighbors around you, warring countries, you know, hunting for food. But yeah, sports was the only thing I could really think of. And that's the only thing that really stands out of, you know, hey, we can have like a functioning group of a gender, you know, if we're using the essentialism of one gender achieving a common goal. But like the more we look at it, like, you know, and Yellow Jackets has like kind of a supernatural element to it. But I think we in fiction always gravitate toward like, those societies would eventually crumble in upon themselves.
But we always like resort to us versus them, no matter how far down you shrink it. It's always that, you know, it's this town against that town. Oh, you live on that side of the city, you live on that side of the street. You know, it's I don't know, and I don't know, is that a male thing or is that just a human thing? Because why do we have to separate, and just why can't we just be all like it's so strange.
That to me is a patriarchy thing, because the way the patriarchy exists is by pitting us against each other. That's why, you know, there are so many women that feed the patriarchy, because they've decided they're never going to get to the top, but they can get as close to the top as they can, or they will be allowed to get by stepping on other people. And that way the people at the top are never threatened, because we are battling with each other. And I think, you know, stuff like that would probably arise at our town, but I think the common goal there is...
Our town.
Our place. I've been thinking about my so-called life a lot. The common goal there is survival now, but it would be interesting to see our place 10 years down the road. Because women are just as capable of dominating other women, because women are human beings.
Well, this is like where
are neither good nor bad.
Like the patriarchy aspect of it is really important, but what you just described, I completely agree with 100%. I just see the distinction as class, you know? And it's it's like, don't get me wrong, patriarchy is a huge part of it, and it is inextricably entwined with it. But I think like when it comes to essentialism, I'm always interested, when it comes to race or gender, I'm always asking how class factors in, because that to me is what makes the most sense. And I think that it exacerbates and feeds into those divisions, like any division, right? It's like, and, you know, the idea of pitting people against each other, that is, you know, almost by definition, a capitalist notion. And so
But that's taken away as well. So then what?
Yeah.
Well, and what's interesting about class is the one thing that we think we can change, but we have very little control over that, as opposed to like race or gender. Like you're kind of set in your allotments based on what society considers you. But class, you think that you're going to be, if I just work hard enough, if I just push enough people down, I'm going to be able to move up to another class. Yeah. And we don't want us to.
And the book does engage with that to some degree, because we do see a lot of the women who were in the prison, who a lot of their circumstances, it was because of, you know, people in their life, but it was also because of their social standing and their class standing. And it was because they didn't have the resources to that other people have, and they had to rely on other people, or they had to, you know, do like, you know, commit crime in order to make their way forward. It's an inevitability of people who don't have the resources. What were you going to say, Jen?
Well, I think setting the book in Appalachia inherently brings
Yep.
class in too, because that is a huge factor in what has happened to Appalachia is that, the non-college educated whites that people are always talking about, that's almost like a shorthand for people from this part of the country too.
Yeah, but then you kind of see once those shackles of class have kind of been loosened, when we go to our place,
Yeah.
a lot of those people start, becoming useful to society and embraced by society in many different ways because their skills are valuable and they're being
Yeah, and
recognized for those skills.
Exactly. It's not necessarily that they weren't valuable before. It's
Right.
now we are seeing them because the cars won't run. So who needs gas?
Yep. Yep.
But
Yeah.
we need doctors and we need food. That stuff is always valuable. It's like caregiving has always been valuable, but we devalue it because it's a feminized trait. And that's a class thing too. This is a lower class job, so it's not as valuable, even though everybody needs a plumber because nobody wants to plumb their own house.
That's true. Jen, you also asked, who is the target audience here, men or women? I'd love to hear you riff on that and also hear Julia and Flieger what you think about that.
I don't know what I think about this because part of me, especially if we consider the dedication, this is dedicated to Sandra Bland. I've got more thoughts on that later, but is King trying to say, hey, I see you women. Yeah, your life sucks. What can we do to help? Or is he trying to say, men, get your shit together. Stop being assholes. And I don't know. So
it can't be both?
It could be both.
I think it's trying to be both. And it doesn't have to be one or the other. But I do think that there is the feeling in the end that I'm not wholly sure what this book is trying to say.
I would say he's aiming this at constant readers, to be honest. I don't think there's any gender aim because I think there's coverage on both sides. And keep in mind, his first book was Carrie, right? Female protagonist. I don't think King's ever felt caged in to only represent one gender in his character.
Oh, no.
Some of his richest characters are of either side, either
in the
gender.
early 90s,
agree.
Gerald's Game,
So
Rose
that's
Madder,
why
Dolores
I
Claiborne.
do think, though,
yeah.
this is geared toward a mainstream audience and specifically the constant readers. So nothing I discerned from this made me feel like one gender was being targeted over another, despite, the title.
How did you feel, Flieger, in the end? You close the final chapter. What are you left with?
A feeling of unsatisfaction.
Yeah. And how come?
I was not too happy. I just, again, to me, it's like, this is a premise for like a Twilight Zone episode. I get it was contained. There's reasons why it was a short novel or not short novel, but a short time period within the novel existing. But some of these broader questions that we're discussing now, I wouldn't mind if it got, I don't know, a little more in depth versus let's have so many, 75 characters that we get to know a little bit about. Let's have the 35 that we get to know a lot about and maybe have the timeline run a lot longer to see some of these implications. When I mentioned Children of Men, it's been years since the last kid was born. So we kind of teleport ahead in this big time jump of like, no, it's now we've already, it's been set in stone. How does society change? Whereas with this, I think it's a little too rapid to see some of the deterioration or improvements on the other side.
Sure.
So there's like this sense of, it's feeling rushed and not fulfilling for me.
Julia, what do you think? How did you feel when you closed the book?
I kind of agree with that. I think it's like when you review anything, you can't review the book that isn't there, right? I can't review the book I want. I'm reviewing the book that is there. But I think an interesting way to have done it would have been, if Elaine had been successful in burning the tree down, and now the women are stuck on the other side, and then you jump forward 10 years, and then 20 years, and then 30 years, and like really go through and see the widening difference of what those worlds look like, because they're going to get further and further apart of what's happening on either side. I guess the main thing that I felt at the ending is just like Evie just kind of disappears out of the story.
Mm-hmm.
And, when the women decide to go back, they just says Evie cried. And I go, okay, is she crying because she's sad they made this decision? Is she happy they made this decision? Does, what do tears mean for her if she's not necessarily a human woman? It's a whole different ball of wax. And so I feel like I would have really liked some resolution with her. And I feel like, her and Clint going back and forth and having in-depth interviews would have been more interesting to me. We get a little bit of it, and that's kind of part of my favorite of delving into her. She reminds me a lot of Rose the Hat for some reason. I think of her when I think of
I can
Evie.
see that, yeah.
And so I was like, she's got this really cool, fun, like she's, almost Randall Flagg-esque, like I'm having fun with being evil and being creating mischief and let's be wacky. I'm going to play some video games and like that kind of stuff is really, really fun. But she just, we never find out. It's okay if we never find out who she is exactly, right? We assume she's Eve from the Bible, assumedly. She's come an emissary of God, perhaps. We don't know. And I don't need that answer, but I would like to know, like, what happened to her? Where'd she go? She just disappear off the face of the earth and they turned her on and she was moths? Like, what happened?
Yeah, I wonder if the comic explores any of those because I'm very similar. Like, I don't have to know this, but my curiosity is like, I want to know all about her. I want to know her origins. I want
course.
to know what universe she comes from.
Well, if I had a more of a handle on what exactly she wanted to accomplish and how she
But
really
she didn't want to accomplish anything, right? Like, that's her whole point. She's like, it's not me doing this.
Well,
Somebody
see,
else is doing this.
and that's-
I'm just a messenger.
and that to me is like kind of inherently unsatisfying.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so that's where I think I land in this place where, and again, I agree with you, Julie, about like not reviewing the book that we didn't get, but I think it's more about what I was left wanting. And at the end of the book, something I actually was quite moved by was the idea that Lila and Clint get separated and she experiences this life with, and time is longer in our place. So they spent like several months there, almost a year maybe. And Lila had experienced this whole thing with all these women, and she obviously missed her parts of her family and her son and everything. But she also had all this time to reflect on her marriage. And then I think Clint went through something similar, but on a much shorter time frame, and probably realized he like loved his wife even more. And she comes back, and what they're not able to reconcile. And it's a very melancholy kind of drift. It's this idea. It's like, she's like, I've seen something else. And it's not as if I don't love you, but I can't be with you anymore.
Yeah.
That to me was very satisfying. But of all the stories, that was the only one that felt satisfying. And I think like what I found myself wanting was that they had doubled down on the premise. Jen, I feel like you might agree with me on this. I'm just like, is that go there? You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I
Actually
agree.
separate, like make that there's some point of no return. Like commit to the premise or don't, you know?
Yeah, I agree. And I think I was happy that their relationship fell apart. Not because I don't want them together, because I did really like both of those characters. And I felt really bad for their son. But I think there had to be some kind of cost here to the people who are choosing to come back. And I think when I closed this book, I cried a lot in the scene when they were coming back, when they were making the decision. And I was like, okay, and I remembered that they all went back, and I don't think I ever thought they wouldn't, but I got really emotional during that part and like had to turn it off for a minute and just like kind of sit with my feelings. And I think what it was is that it broke open a lot of things I'd been feeling over the last couple of weeks and hadn't really had an outlet for. And I was like, no, you haven't considered this long enough. Like, you need to weigh all of the costs, because the judge even says this is not about exceptions. This is not about the men in our lives that we like. This is about every woman on earth. And I felt like their deliberation was not long enough for what they were considering. And there was also a point where I was like, this is possible. Something actually is going to change. This patriarchal system is going to be toppled. They have the power to do it, and they don't want to. And while I understand and probably would do the same thing, it felt so easy. It felt like they came back and then all the shit started up again, you know? And yeah, it's a little bit better. And so to have Lila actually say, I don't want this old life that I had, felt really validating. It was like, okay, well, something does have to change. I can't just go back to everything that I saw a way out of and just hope that it'll get better, and just pray that these men have learned their lesson and they'll treat us better, because I know that they're not. Some of them will, but most of them won't, you know? So I got really, really frustrated. And I think that was the bit of melancholy that I needed to kind of feel seen in my frustration, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Julia, were you going to say something?
No.
Okay. Just making sure.
I was listening real hard, though.
Oh, sorry.
There's more we could discuss. I want to move on for the sake of time, but I imagine we'll touch on some more of this stuff in Heroes and Villains. First, I want to do a quick detour to structure and format.
Look at me. Look at me, teacher.
In structure and format, we talk about the shape of the book. I guess I'm curious if you noticed anything notable in terms of the prose itself. We got kind of an old Kingian trick, which are this is kind of the only thing I really pegged here was chapters set in the perspective of animals. But there's a more fantastical quality here that makes me think it might be more of Owen's thing. Like when we get like say Kojak's POV in The Stand, it's kind of like I don't know, there's like a groundedness to it. Whereas here there is something much more magical. And it made me think it might have been Owen, since I know his latest book, The Curator, had magical cats in it. So I think he might be into magical animals. And he even said he was into more fantastical work. I've not read his work, so I can't speak to that. But I did think that was, at least something mildly experimental that was happening in the pages here. I'm not sure I quite liked it or think it was necessary, but it at least gave the book some interesting texture. In terms of the shape of the book, the structure, the ways in which that it unfolded, did you notice anything else?
The only thing I'll say, I don't know if I necessarily noticed this, but the reason I kept thinking about The Stand is because it felt paced like The Stand. Like, I feel like we call The Stand post-apocalyptic, and we might call this post-apocalyptic, but it's not, because we see the apocalypse happen. Right. Like, we get the whole thing. And I think as much as I did enjoy some of the sections at the beginning, I think they got too mired in, like, I need to show the beginning of Captain Trips, and I need to show the ripple effects of all of that. And I wonder if we had joined the world with our place in existence and the men fighting, and then see a bunch of this through flashbacks, I wonder if that would have felt a little more streamlined for me, and that could have been a way to eliminate some of the characters too.
Yeah. So there's other King books it reminds me of, which I'll save for later when we deal more with the characters. But in terms of the structure, one of them was mentioned, the HBO's The Leftovers. Mm-hmm. It reminded me a lot, without giving away major spoilers, but there's a lot of the multi-dimensional elements happening there. And then also Stranger Things, when we jump to the Upside Down. Yeah. Where it's not a 1-for-1, tennis match back and forth between these two worlds. But when we do go over there, that's what it feels very different. And those are the only two media properties that immediately come to mind when I think of but now I'm calling it like Our House.
Our House.
It's a
very, very, very fine house.
So
it's a very, very, very fun house. Fun house.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I don't think I have much else in this section.
Yeah, it's
but
pretty straightforward.
What's that?
It's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, it's pretty straightforward. But I do think that what you're saying is apt, and I think too with like the Our Place, like Fligger, you just brought up the Upside Down, and I think that's interesting because in the same way that the Upside Down feels like whatever the Stranger Things writers need it to be at any given time, that's kind of how this felt to me. It was like I didn't see the internal logic of the world. I don't know if I needed to necessarily, but I did find myself like the ways in which Our Place as a world exists is that it exists in whatever way is most conducive to the story it's telling, which can make it feel a little artificial. And I think that's maybe why I prefer the sort of like society building ultimately in The Stand, because it is our world, but it is a completely different world. And that's because more time has passed, right? And so it's one of those where I think, I saw the authors a little bit more than I would have liked to.
Agreed.
But I'll leave it there. Let's talk about characters in Heroes and Villains.
I'm gonna have to kill this fucking clown. Welcome to the Losers Club, asshole!
In Heroes and Villains, we talk about the characters, who we loved, who we hated, and good God, we're going to talk about every single one of them, so buckle up. Just kidding. There's way too many characters. We're going to talk broadly about Evie, Lila, Clint, and Frank, who I think are kind of the four leads, and then I told the crew here to kind of just come prepared to talk about maybe a couple others that you were interested in, either in a good way or somebody who maybe frustrated you. I have a character like that. Let's start with Evie, because this is a weird fucking character. There's a quote here from the EW article I want to read. Owen is talking about her, and he goes, "I don't know about you, Dad, but I like her unknowability. She really isn't quite defined." And Stephen King says, "She has a twinkle of humor there that gives the character some texture, and she seems human as well as otherworldly. So she's got a foot in each, and I like that about her. I like the mystery of her." To which I say, bullshit. You don't understand your character. And I'm not saying that in a mean way. I get it. But it's like the unknowability. Yeah, sometimes ambiguity around a character can be really good. But I really felt like this character was throwing darts at a dartboard. You know what I mean? It's like they try to add some, like, you know, Julia, you mentioned the whole Eve quality, like this could be the biblical Eve. And then they talk about how poets, you know, like ancient poets wrote about her, and that the implication is that she is this, you know, timeless deity, if you will, or fairy or something along those lines that has sort of traveled throughout time making mischief, and it's like almost like a Flagian figure, you know, in some ways, but a hot chick. So
yeah. Or a muse, kind of like a muse as well.
A muse is a good word for it. So I don't know, I guess, like, what was our journey like with Evie? Did you like her unknowability, or did you find her, like me, a bit frustrating? Jen, you have an impish look on your face.
Yeah, I found her pretty frustrating. I think there was, like, I couldn't ever land on if she felt relatable, like she's just hanging out, she's joking around, she's playing Boomtown, or is she this like tiger-eyed goddess who like, so I feel like the two never quite met up. And I think where I ultimately landed is I'm like kicking around writing a book about King's female characters. And so I would obviously write about her because she is so prominent in a book like this. And I don't know what I would say about her, you know, like she doesn't, I don't know what she wants.
Well, I think that's the conversation, right? Is like, what is this character?
Exactly. What is her purpose here? And she really just feels like a chaos agent, but not in a fun way like Flag. Like there's something that's missing because she doesn't feel real. I feel like she feels more like a concept and a plot device than an actual character.
Yeah. Julia, how'd you feel?
I guess I felt like I didn't understand why people didn't ask her more deep questions. You know, I know that she kind of, you know, reflects, you know, and glances off whatever they ask, and she's never going to give them a straight answer anyway. But even Clint, I feel like as a doctor and a psychiatrist, like should be asking and really be interested in the whys of the wherefores and where are you coming from and why are you here and what does this mean? And like he takes on his role quite well, but I feel like he does trust her, but why? Because it feels like trusting Flag, right? Because like she's gonna fuck you over eventually anyway, man. Like, don't trust this girl. She clearly doesn't know. She's playing both sides. You know, she's lying to Frank, she's lying to Clint, she's lying to everybody. So we don't know exactly what does she want. And I feel like it seems like she really does want to come and separate the two genders, right? It seems like she really does want that to separate to happen permanently, but she can't, like, she's trying to push it to happen, but she can't make it happen. So it is a bit confusing in there. And like I said, she kind of does like a Rose the Hat thing for me, but I feel like we get less Rose in Doctor Sleep, but I know her better
100%.
than I know Evie. And so I was like, there could just be a couple of sentences, like one more scene to kind of delve into her to give me more meat. But I do like her as a character. I just wish there was more of her.
Yeah, I think
I wanted her to be like a Glenn Bateman kind of character, you know?
I think this was my biggest problem with the plot was I didn't fully understand why Clint was preventing everyone from talking to her. Like, here's the thing. I know Frank and the cops are not necessarily there to perhaps just talk to her. They want to apprehend her. But Frank is so measured as a character, I think, and I say that relatively, we'll talk more about it. He's not crazy, right? He's angry.
He has flare-ups, yeah.
He's angry, and he's and he's maybe chaotic, but I don't think
he's no trash can man.
No.
Yes.
He has rationality.
I can see if he was like a big Jim Rennie character, that why Clinton would want to protect her. But I think that the whole showdown at the end seemed, I didn't fully understand why they couldn't just like say, yeah, let's bring her to Atlanta and let the doctors talk to her because we're not getting any answers and she seems pretty important to this whole thing. Like Clint seemed to, and this is what you said, Juliet, like Clint seemed to sort of like agree, like, you know, kind of be beholden to her in ways that I found a little bit baffling. And it felt to me, again, I'm seeing the writers a little bit too much where I'm like, they need to keep her in a specific place and keep her ready to be used in the way that they want to use her. But then the story unfolded and I don't think they knew what to do. Like they also alleviated her. You brought this up earlier, Julia, that she said, well, this isn't even me. You know what I mean? Like there was this sense that she was ultimately a little bit powerless. And so
she says she's powerless.
Yeah, which is, to me, I don't know what I'm reading anymore.
Well, that's I was going to say the character doesn't know what she is, so how is the reader supposed to process what she is? You know, Jen said it was kind of like a narrative plot device. There's too many unanswered questions, and I would contrast her with another character that I think is similar in their role, and that would be Leland Gaunt in Needful Things, where we don't get the fully defined origins. We don't know a ton about the character, but he literally has a sign, the caveat emptor, you know, buyer beware. That is him. That explains it. Yeah. He is the manifestation of that. That's all we need to know, is that this is what he is here to introduce to the plot. Whereas with Evie, there's a lot of like, well, I don't know. And it's just like a lot of wishy-washiness that I found very
she's doing John Wayne impressions. And I'm like, stop being silly.
Yeah. And it could have been, it could have been, if they would have given her a percentage more like, I don't know, ability to understand her own origins and her mission, I would have, at least as a reader, been nudged in a better direction. But I was left with a lot of like, what exactly was the purpose of this? And
or to
whether
make
that's
her more,
meant,
like, make her more central to the climax.
Yeah, and like it sort of is in the lap of the reader to determine what her role was, but I don't feel like I had enough information to make an educated, you know, conclusion in that regard.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that it frustrates me too, because back when I was asking who the target audience for is, I think I want this book to be about women. Do you want men? Do you want to live in a world without men? Like, I think I would be happy if once the women all fell asleep, the men's world disappeared and we just spent time in our town. And a lot of the you have to protect me, Clint, or all of these men are going to come try to kill me, that felt very contrived, and that felt like trying to make a piece of the allegory, trying to answer a question that critics are going to have about this book before it gets asked. The one thing I like about Frank's whole thing is I really like the idea that he cannot understand what this is and his solution is to destroy it. And I feel like that can kind of go into a lot of, you know, women's healthcare issues. Like, we've got to study you, we've got to figure out, instead of just listening to her. But on the other hand, she's telling everybody a bunch of different shit. Exactly.
But
yeah. And
the means by which they're doing it is obviously destructive. And that's a comment on men broadly, which is that,
I think which is that frustration, you know, with not being able to exercise domain over something, you resort to violence.
Yeah,
right?
And there is.
If I can't understand it, I will destroy it, or I will destroy something else, you know, to vent my rage.
And all of that just feels much more symbolic than it does authentic character, you know?
Yes. And I want to use this to, since you're talking about Frank, I want to pivot to talking about him, because I think what you just touched on is one of my favorite lines of the book. And it's the one quote. Frank is probably, out of the male characters, the one I guess I had the most, you know, I could get my arms around a little bit. But even then, and Jen, you and I texted about this a little bit, so I've been turning this around. I don't feel like they ever went sicko mode with him. And I feel like they needed to go sicko mode with him. Like, there was too much restraint with the character. And I know that sounds a little weird because he is, you know, a lot. But this line, though, like, I think that they had almost too much empathy for the character for what his role was in the story. So there's this line, though, where he says, embracing his daughter like this, he could feel her pulse and her breath. The world had a way of spinning from Frank's grasp, of making him wrong or foolish when all he wanted was to be right and good. But he wasn't a coward. He was ready to die for his little girl. So that to me is like really beautiful. And I felt that way as a dude, where it's like, for all your best intentions, right, just results in you breaking shit. And that, I think, is what's going on with his character. But for the role that he plays in this, which is this person who is essentially leading this raid to get this woman, I felt like I needed a big Jim Rennie character. You know what I mean? Or Junior Rennie.
But he's a black character too, right?
Yeah.
We don't really get that until a few hundred pages in. I didn't even realize he was a black character until much later in. Yeah,
like
but that's an issue with how the character is written, right? That should be, there's been much said about King's relationship to the black community with his characters. And here it's like, it's not enough to just dub the character as that. You have to have some kind of understanding of how that affects the character's outlook on things. And that kind of left Frank unsatisfying for me as well.
Completely agree. And I went back and looked a couple of years ago. I talked to Scott Woods about his essay, Stephen King's Magical Negroes, and looking at his black characters and how they play into the narrative. And he has a lecture that you can find on YouTube that is called Stephen King's Magical Negroes, a lecture. It's fantastic. I highly recommend it. And if you haven't listened to our episode, go back and listen because he's got a lot of really great insights.
Yeah.
But yeah, he calls this the first book of the truly woke king. And specifically talking about Frank Gehry, he says, we meet Frank on page 35. We meet his blackness on page 72.
Yeah.
Because that is when he says, as an African-American man, and that is the first indication. Now, he goes on to say, and this is quoting from his lecture, traditionally, when King introduces a black character, he makes no bones about their blackness. When King sees a black character in his mind, he makes sure that the reader is aware of it in the most bluntly efficient way possible. Here, King pulls a racial switcheroo.
Mm-hmm.
He does the same thing with Jeanette Swarley, who is introduced on page 1, but we don't find out that she is black until page 308. And again, like I don't say this as a criticism, but I think that affects the way Frank is portrayed, because this book, maybe this is part of my problem. I don't know who the villain is. I know men are the villain, but like Frank seems a little too sympathetic, and I agree with you. I need him to kind of go all in, kind of the way that Blast Kid does. But I think King
Pete,
is afraid.
Right? Like
Pete. Yeah.
Pete and Blas are like they're the junior Rennie, right? Like they're
right.
And that's I keep going to those characters, or like Lloyd and Poke even to a degree. I don't know. It's just like, no, those are more like the guys with the bazooka. But anyways, like
the Griner brothers.
Yeah,
I think Frank Gehry also having
ahead.
a name, the famous architect Frank Gehry, who did like the Pritzker Pavilion here in Chicago and like the Disney Symphony. So every time I hear Frank Gehry, I think of like, I believe Canadian architect who's like an older white guy. So that's what I was picturing in my mind. And then it was kind of hard to change the image in my, mind's eye, like quarter of the way through the novel.
Yeah. It makes you wonder, did King originally intend for them to be black? Or is this him kind of muddling his way through trying to write? Because Woods also notes that this is his first book with 2 black leads, with Jeanette and Frank, and that it is
Evie too.
And Evie, yeah, and that it ultimately is
Evie?
good.
Yeah, she's not described as black until about halfway through the book, but she is described as that. Yeah.
Oh, see, and I missed that.
Yeah.
No, okay.
I feel like I
didn't get that.
Did you get that?
You wonder if that's too many cooks in the kitchen, right? If maybe one, Owen had a vision of what this character looked like, and then Steve did it different, and then by the time they realized that it was,
I could be mistaken, but I was
her last name is Black.
So. I was very much under the impression she was, based on several, because I think I even wrote in my notes, wait, Evie's black. So again, maybe it was a mistake on my part, but I feel like there were multiple indicators of that based on, but it, maybe because I feel like a lot of it was people like Pete saying stuff like, oh, Clint's talking to the black woman or whatever. And maybe he was just saying like her last name is Black. I don't know.
Black.
Oh, yeah, it's true.
I might be wrong.
I mean, it could be.
Regardless,
but I think
I don't think it matters that much, but yeah.
That illustrates the point. I think there is an attempt here to try to write diverse characters, racially diverse characters. And I do think that this is good, and I love that King will attempt to do this kind of stuff. Wood says it's revealing his attempt to consciously deal with the issue of race, which is good. But we also have our two black leads. One of them is, he calls him a raging abusive jerk, and the other is a criminal. So I think if you go too hard on Frank and you make him too villainous, that presents a problem, because then he is the angry black man. And he already kind of is.
That's a good point.
But I think King is afraid, in the way that I think he's afraid of letting Jerome and Barbara have any flaws.
Any flaws whatsoever.
Yeah.
I have zero sympathy for Frank. Absolutely none. I despise him as a character.
Talk about that, Julia. Like, what was it that really put you off about him?
I guess it's the, so we have him as the dog catcher, and he hurts people who hurt animals.
Yeah.
And I understand that. But it's like the thing in horror movies where like people are okay with people getting killed in horror movies, no problem. But if a dog gets killed, people lose their fucking mind.
Yeah, you just described me.
Yeah. But like, what about the people? What about the people?
I don't care about the people.
See?
They're sinners. They're sinners. The animals are innocent.
I don't, I think, for me, it boils down to, you have, Frank as the brawn, Clint as the brains, and which one is worse, which, and you Frank is the bad guy, Clint is the good guy. But I think turning that against it, because Clint is actually the first person to make a move, right? He's the first one who, okay, somebody getting shot. So he's like, I don't want anybody to come and start shooting people up, but then he's the first one to do it. So I think they are trying to take the characters and be like, oh, is Clint a good guy? Because that's what he's set up as. But I don't know that he is any more than Frank is. And Frank gets he has no redeeming qualities for me. Like, yes, he loves his daughter, but he loves her in like not a way that a daughter should be loved. He loves her in this kind of horrible, controlling, abusive way that's not, it's, and I'm glad that he gets his anger management stuff at the end. But like, if he would have died, I would have been so happy. If Evie would have killed him and be like, you're the epitome of everything that's wrong with men, and just kill this guy, I would have been like, yes, please kill the guy.
That would have been more satisfying. You can't, I'm like, come on, man, you can't do the whole, like, he went to therapy and everything's okay now. Like, come on. Although it just made me laugh. Like, it's that meme about like, a man will, raid a prison before going to therapy or whatever. Yep. So, hey man, I go to therapy. But I'm also not raiding prisons. Okay. Yeah. I think I think all that's really interesting. I wouldn't say like I liked Frank necessarily, but I at least found him to have more texture than Clint. And so let's talk about Clint a little bit. I really don't have a strong... This was like a Mears case, right? Like a Ben Mears case where I'm like, I cannot get a grasp on you. Like, we get a lot of character. We get a lot of background. He's got this interesting troubled past. He has this woman who named her child after him for some reason, and then he has this marriage that I don't know, man. I again, in the same way that I kind of needed Frank to be a big Jim Rennie type, or to at least fall into that archetype, I needed Clint to fall into like an Alan Pangborn archetype or something. Yes. I felt like unmoored from these characters. They didn't feel, and I guess that's the thing, is I really love archetypal characters, and King does them so well because I like to have that to hang my hat on as I'm reading something. Like, I felt more connected to the Griner brothers than I did to Clint, because the Griner brothers represented, like, they were so clearly drawn, and they're archetypal characters, like they're chaos agents, and I love that. Clint to me was a very like wishy-washy character. He was a character that was all these things, but yet nothing at the same time. But I don't know. Did you guys connect with him at all, Flieger?
No, not really. I thought Leela should have been the main character. That's the only one that I really cared about in the whole story. Clint, I think because I just watched The Penguin on HBO. There's like the therapist in the jail at Arkham, and I just put that image in my mind as well for him. So it says a lot when the characters in the book, I have to like kind of attach existing properties and IP just to kind of visualize them, because I just don't feel like I was given enough to really connect. And I'm not trying to say like I hated this book, but I really struggled to find a character that I could kind of see myself in, or maybe process what was happening. Instead, I really did feel like kind of an outside observer with a sense of like disinterest.
Julia, how about you? Did he snap for you? Did he spark for you?
I do like Clint, and I like that he's it's hard because he's very, very honest, but he's also very, very secretive. So you're getting that kind of duality of he expects everybody else to be completely honest with him, and he is honest when it matters, but he's also held back everything about his childhood from Lila and his family. I do like his backstory, and I do like you get this sense of him being this angry, angry man who has had to hold it down all this time, and he has in a successful way, but it's also eaten away at his marriage. So, the first time I read this, I was like, oh, Clint's clearly the good guy, but then this time I'm like, no, but he starts it, man.
Right,
and
right.
he, and he says that, like, oh, did I start it? I'm like, yes, you fucking started it. You said you weren't going to, and then you did. And then so it's interesting because Evie's counting on Frank to start it, but then Clint kind of does. So and her, I think the most interesting thing about her is watching her play everybody against each other. And I wish I had more of her reaction to that she because I think the thing that's surprising to me is like how much she's creating everything that's happening. So like killing Judge Silver, for instance, right? She says she's sorry she has to do it, but I have to do this because nobody from outside of town can come in. And so she's just killing people. She sends Jeanette off to be killed. And these are things like she knows these things are going to happen, but she doesn't seem to have any sort of connection to the people that's happening with or feel bad about humans or like what is her connection to humanity. I wish that made itself more clear. And why Clint? Why does she pick him?
Exactly. Like the connection between the two of them was very murky to me. And I'll say this, like, because this relates to what you're saying, Julia, and I think that's where the most interesting part of Clint to me was the way Lila's opinion of him kind of shifted slowly throughout the course of the book. And I think that sort of relates in some ways. One of the things I want to talk about earlier that I'm sure will come up a little bit more, but like I feel like this book does a pretty interesting job of showing variations of sexism, which is you have someone like Pete who is so blatantly, aggressively predatory, or Eric Blass, who is a little bit psychotic and wants to set a woman on fire. But then you also have someone like Clint who seems like the nice guy. But then you get, like, when Lila is in our place, she has this these musings about him where she's talking to Coates about him. And she says, Coates says, Clint was that bad of a husband. And Lila basically says, well, no, he was a good husband and a good father. He pulled his weight. He loved me. I never doubted that. But there was a lot he never told me about himself. Things I shouldn't have had to find out in ways that made me feel bad about myself. Clint talked the talk about openness and support, talked until his face turned blue. But when you got below the surface, he was your basic Marlboro man. It's worse, I think, than being lied to. A lie indicates a certain degree of respect. I'm pretty sure he was carrying a bag of stuff, real heavy stuff, that he thought I was just too delicate to help him with. I'd rather be lied to than condescended to. And then she elaborates a little bit and she kind of just says, Clint has another side, a harder side, angrier. I didn't come to see it clearly until recently. And she kind of talks about, I'm sorry, that was actually Coates. And then Lila says, it pisses me off, but you know what's worse? It's left me feeling kind of disheartened. And it's more of this like subtle disappointment. Where he was never outwardly abusive or dismissive or violent, but there was kind of this quiet emotional violence that was maybe happening. Jen, what do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think the more we talk about this, I think the more I'm realizing that the men in this story are symbols of different types of masculinity, like you said.
Yeah.
Because the most interesting thing to me about Clint is what Lila learns about herself through their relationship, not anything he does. I would have been much more interested in this story if he had actually fathered that child, if he had a flaw.
Right.
But he is like like compared to Frank, he's like the husband that you think is nice, but he's actually not. Like you said, I like the way you said quiet violence, or like emotional violence. And he seems to exist to show that side of a man you don't want to be with too, as opposed to an actual human being. So yeah, I really had a hard time connecting with him because he doesn't feel.
That was the condescension in regards to, I'd rather him lie to me than condescend, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
I don't
this
think mansplaining element of that.
Right.
No, but that he's not even aware of, but she picks up on it. And it's like, I'd rather you just fucking straight up lie to my face than act like I'm too stupid.
And he thinks he's a good guy, know. He's one of the like not all men guys, but he doesn't realize. And I think that's what he's supposed to symbolize in this story.
And that to me is really like, that's interesting to me.
Yeah.
And but it still wasn't enough to bring the character to life. I think I was only interested in him in as much as he related to Lila.
Yeah.
Whereas like someone like Pete, who is a very, he's this kind of lecherous prison guard. He kind
You
of
mean
plays.
Peters?
What's that?
Peters?
Oh, Peter. I kept calling
Don
him
Peters?
Pete. I meant Don Peters.
Okay.
This is who I've been talking
All right, just
about
making
whenever
sure.
I said Pete. Thank you
Thinking
for
of
that.
Mad Men's Pete Campbell. Yeah.
Oh, I love Pete Campbell.
just
Hey,
fine.
Pete Campbell has a little. He actually has one of the happier endings. Spoiler alert. He's the one who actually becomes less toxic as the show goes on. Which I love that about Mad Men. But I think like with Don Peters, this is a guy who I think his sexism is blatant, but it's also, I think, pretty well drawn. There's this line when you kind of spend a little time with him at home, and he has a couple different moments where he talks about women as if they're characters on television. Like he goes like, oh, aren't women supposed to be good at computers or something like that? They are on all the TV shows. And it's a clever little line in just that it shows in his mind, women are just characters. They're not actual flesh and blood human beings. But then on the next page, he gets this line about how he had assaulted Jeanette, and he blames her. He goes, well, she shouldn't have tempted me. I was weak in that moment, And that to me was a really like, I think that was like a really smart depiction of that kind of sexism where even the predator usually doesn't realize they're being predatory, right? Like they have found a way to convince themselves in their head that they are the ones who are the victim, even if they are the ones who are doing the predatory action. And that to me was, I think, well drawn. And I'm glad we get like the juxtaposition between that kind of predator, and then you have someone like Eric Blass who is just crazy, right? Like he just wants to hurt people. I wish we got more of that because that kind of character thrives under King, and I wish like we needed more of a Power Hour here.
I was just gonna say, you don't talk about a bully.
I know when he showed up, I was like, let's go, and then sadly.
Right.
But anyways, I guess like that leads us to talk about Lila a little bit.
Is it Lila? Okay, sorry. I was saying
I
Lila
said
in my
Lila.
head.
It could have been Leela. Either way. What did you guys think? Jen?
They say in the audiobook, they say Lila,
Okay,
but
cool. Well, what did you think about her?
Lila. I mean, she's like the Ben Mears of women, She's fine. I like her, but she's just kind of a conduit for a good audience reader, like I think she is our eyes through which we see the story. She doesn't really have too many flaws. She considers more than she acts, I think. Like she feels like a way for King to work out a lot of what he thinks about this premise, And then she's a cop and we have this whole shooting thing. So that feels
that seemed
weird too.
Very distracting.
Well, that's why I was saying, like, I wish she would have been made more of a main character because she checks a lot of the boxes from what, she's been working a 12-hour shift, so she's been awake. She's a police officer. She connects there. She becomes the leader of our plate. There's a lot going on that could make her a meatier character, but instead we're kind of left with she's not really that much more important than Clint or Frank in my eyes.
Yeah.
The fatal flaw in some ways, and Julie, I believe you said this, or maybe it was you, Jen, about the secret daughter that Clint supposedly has. The fact that we don't, that story kind of fizzles out, and we find out that no, Clint didn't have a secret daughter, and Lila like blames herself, and she's like, "Oh, I'm dumb," or something. Like, why did I think that?
Yeah,
I don't know, man. I think that they had a plan, or they had an idea for that, but that felt very deflating for me because it felt like it turned Lila's gaze inward in ways that I just don't think helped the narrative. I don't know. I found it a weird decision to focus so much on that story and then have it amount to nothing. But maybe I'm reading it wrong. If any of you guys feel differently.
No, it's so much more interesting if she has to decide, should I go back to my shitty husband who cheated on me, than am I a bitch who believed that my saint husband cheated on me and he didn't. It was actually some other bitch who like ruined our marriage. And that's probably too harsh, but I agree with you. I was really frustrated by the story. I was like, what are we doing with this? And do we even need it if this is where it's going to end?
Right. Julia, what did you think about Lila? Was she a character you latched onto?
Well, I agree with you both. I feel like we probably could have I don't really think we need the secret daughter subplot at all,
I
really.
agree.
Like I
Yeah.
feel
Yep.
like having him connect to Shannon is fine and that's okay, but I don't think that there could be a rift between them that at the beginning of the story, but I don't think it necessarily needs to be that, especially when we don't learn what happens to them later or anything. Like we
Right.
don't know what happens to the secret daughter or Shannon or anything, which is although they do talk on the phone. Um, Lila, I don't know. I feel like she should be our like Stu from the
Yeah.
stand. You know, we should be like really on board with her, and she's the one who's gonna like really get everything because somebody, over in our place needs to have everything together and be like, okay, I'm gonna lead. Let's do this. How do we do it? And I feel like she's primed for that. But then because of the shooting of Jeanette, she loses her footing and kind of goes off into this other direction. And I feel like it's really that moment that she changes and just her whole everything she thought she was and why did you do everything, and I'm not sure why Evie sets that up, right?
Right.
Because we're assuming Evie knows everything that's going to happen, although she does chide the snake at the end for distracting Jeanette and having that happen.
Right.
So is it something we believe that Evie really thought Jeanette was going to be okay, or did she send her in knowing she was going to get killed?
I almost like, I've talked about this on the pod before. I get frustrated when somebody's powers sort of seem unlimited and then suddenly we see a limit, like out of, I don't know. I like to know the nature. I call this like the Captain Marvel problem. It's like where can you just do everything? Like, and you start to, and then it kind of deflates things a little bit. And then when you do see that they have some kind of like something they can, like the snake, her chiding the snake was a very odd moment for me. And I guess it did speak in some ways to this idea that she's quote unquote powerless. But again, all of this to me just served to muddy up the works. And I like to just know the extent of a character's powers. And again, I don't know. I keep noticing we keep coming back to Evie and when we talk about these characters, which I think is interesting because I think it speaks to the idea that we have this like nucleus at the center of the story who baffles us. So, okay. I think we've talked about the leads. I'd love it if we just kind of went around and chimed in on some characters that either intrigued us, we wanted more of, or maybe represented things that, moments of frustration. Fleeker, I'll start with you. Who was a character that worked for you?
Eric Blass.
Yeah, we love a psycho.
Just the psycho that lighting a homeless woman on fire. That's pretty insane. But that to me is like a very Stephen King type, horror show. Yeah, I mean, and there's some elements of like the guys who got deputized being like, Jim Rennie Jr.
Yeah, it was
where they
very
were
much
just
under the dome. Yeah,
right. And I think that also speaks to like who do we appoint as law enforcement, who watches the Watchmen, these kind of elements. But to me, I just thought that was like one of the more horrific elements of this novel because despite all the stuff happening, I didn't feel a sense of terror often through this, other than when a few characters were on page. But he's definitely one of them.
Yeah, Jen, how about you?
Fucking Don, man. I hated this guy
Yeah.
in a way that I found really satisfying. I found he felt really broad and really kind of symbolic of a very particular kind of guy. But also, I feel like they really nailed this kind of guy, and he's such a shit. And like, there were a couple of his sections that I have in word processor because they felt so right on to me. They felt so cathartic. Like his death, I was like, yes, yeah, your arm hurts because you stabbed him so many times. Go for it. So
Well,
yeah,
if there's
that
one
really
thing-
worked for me.
If there's one thing King's good at, whether he likes it or not, it's writing scumbags,
Yep,
Well,
absolutely.
is he the one that gives
I
her
really
the
like this one.
Xanax or gives the character?
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, which is such a fucked up thing where you're like, if someone goes to sleep, they're not getting up. And then it's like, I'm going to drug them.
Well, that's the
Exactly.
thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it sets up this like really great like Chekhov's like catharsis because he gets away in that moment, but we're gonna get him because they're not gonna let this guy go.
He's that guy that
such
you're
a
like,
shit.
when he gets killed, it's gonna be fucking awesome.
Exactly.
And it was. Julia, how about you? Who's a supporting character that you responded to?
Well, speaking of killing Don Peters, Angel Fitzroy,
Yeah.
I think, is one of my favorite characters because she's so unpredictable, and I like her anger and that like I'm gonna stay awake just as a big fuck you to everybody, which I really really enjoy. I like that she gets away and she gets to start a new life. And that's something that
Yeah.
is one of the most satisfying parts of the ending for me, because she is a character where like she's going to die so bad. Something's going to terrible. It's going to happen to her. And then it doesn't. And then she gets to a point where she's like, okay, I'm going to go out and I'm going to live my life in a whole new way. And I'm going to tell the truth. And I'm going to be, and you're like, okay, I kind of would like to see more of what happens to her. If there was like a sequel spinoff of like Angel's story, I would read that.
King
What
said
if
that
she
was
makes
one
up
of
with Holly?
yeah.
Ooh, hoo, hoo.
King said that was one of his favorite characters as well. Was Angel. I
And
liked her a
she's
lot.
the one that had the super thick accent. And I think if that accent had not been so out of control, I probably would have agreed with you.
There was a character who I felt like, the thing is, if I read it again, I might notice him showing up earlier, but I felt like this guy came out of nowhere, and he actually represented a type of character that I tend to enjoy, which is that he's a little bit of a wild card. Drew T. Barry. He's like an insurance guy or something, but he was the one who basically, when they were raiding the jail, he kind of splintered off, and he was the one who killed Billy, I believe. But it was one of those guys who kind of just appeared with his gun, and I was liking the way he was written, but it was like page 600, you know? And I'm like, why are we just getting this guy now? And I was like drawn to him, but I was also like, I like everything you're doing as a character, but all of this would be so much better if I had met you and had any idea who you were, aside from the fact that you like to make insurance puns. You know what I mean? So that was, to me, a good example of one of the problems with this book, was that, you know, we talked about have the characters and deepen them. And I agree completely. Like, there's no reason that this guy, Drew T. Barry, couldn't have been like one of the 15 other like 45 to 55-year-old like white dudes in this town. You know what I mean? That we kept spending time with.
We mentioned Under the Dome a few times in this, and I think, you know, that's a book that has there's over a dozen characters in that, right?
Yeah,
but we do feel like we get to know them this whole sequence building up, so when it does culminate, it becomes that much more impactful. But yeah, you're right. That guy I couldn't even think of who you were talking about, Randall. I had to look it up.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like I responded to him because I like what he was doing in the story, but I had no clue who the guy was. So I don't know. Did you guys have any characters like that who you found frustrating, or like, who is this person? Why do we keep going back to them?
Oh, half the fucking characters. Like, I had a really hard time keeping all of these straight. And I think it kind of goes back to what my thesis that's emerging is that most of them are not characters. They're symbols. And I think that's what separates it from The Stand and Under the Dome, because those are sprawling too, but those characters feel real to me. And I'm also thinking, like, when has he ever started a book by listing all of the characters?
Right. That felt very unique to me.
It did. And I think that's a kind of a recognition that we've got too many and that they're running together. And I wonder if an editor was like, you got to give us a roadmap. You know how sometimes there's a map at the beginning of the book so you can place locations. And this, it felt like they're just all over the place. And like, y'all are even talking about some people and I'm having a hard time remembering them. You know?
How about you, Julia? Anybody else resonate with you in a good or bad way?
In a good way. I would like to give a shout out to Willie Burke, who I enjoy very much.
I liked him.
Who is the true blue there to just fucking do it, and he gets killed and brought back to life, and then he gets to have a lady friend at the end and like go off in the sunset. And I was like, that's pretty nice.
That was a pure King character to me. That was like one of his codgy old main guys, you know, but the Appalachian version.
I really like Vanessa Lempley with her, the arm wrestler, with her gravestone with "Your Pride" written on it, and she's just there to fuck up the Griner brothers at the end. I love that. Tiffany Jones, I think, is one of the most interesting characters because she goes, you know, we made her as a meth addict at the beginning, and then she becomes a mother, and then a symbol of things at the end.
It was, she was definitely a good example of, I think, like, you know, someone who unshackled from her addiction. And the kind of, you know, the crowd that she had been running with, these meth guys, you know, was able to fully blossom into something, you know, very, you know, beautiful and compelling human being. Flieger, anybody else?
That about does it for me, Chief.
Yeah, I like the Griner brothers a lot. I'll just throw them out. They reminded me specifically of like Lloyd and Polk, or the meth cooker in Under the Dome, who I love so much. And like just these absolute shit kickers who get a bazooka and blow shit up yeah, they want to kill the woman who snitched on them, but that kind of felt like a paltry excuse for them to just have fun blowing up the police station. I love characters like that. And I thought it was really funny how the guys were like, who the fuck is shooting a bazooka at us like up there?
Yeah. It is funny with Bazooka for Owen King, because I think he's born in 77. So, but if he's a G.I. Joe fan, I feel like bazookas played a big part of my childhood, like in entertainment.
Yeah.
Like I thought they were going to be a bigger problem in my life. Like, yeah, quicksand and bazookas, I thought, just because you would see them all the time. And I don't know how practical they really are, especially in like these settings.
I watched Beverly Hills Cop 2 a lot when I was a kid, and great bazooka scene in that one. All right, let's move on to our next section. It's called Misery.
She died. She just slipped away.
Slipped away! Slipped away! She didn't just slip away! You did it! 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 You murdered my misery!
Annie!
Here in Misery, we talk about the stuff we did not like. I'll kick us off. I hated the way Evie talked. Like, I hated her little quips. I hated her little impressions. I wrote down so many, like, angry... I think, like, half my misery is just her talking. But, hold on, let me find a good example. Page 159 here. Yeah, like, when they come to talk to her for the first time in the prison, she goes, sure, let's chat. Roll the old conversational ball. I feel pretty good. I don't like the way this place smells, though. There's a certain chemical aroma. I'm a fresh air person. A nature girl, you could say. I like a breeze. I like the sun. Earth under my feet. Cue the soaring violins. I'm like, shut the fuck up. Talk to them like a human being. Well, even though she's not a human being. Jen, what do you think?
Well, she's too busy playing Boomtown. So
so dumb.
That
dumb.
was one of mine when she was like, that kiss was kind of nice, not as nice as winning Boomtown. I was like, fuck this stupid game.
Up.
Also, how many times are we going to talk about Mr. Hanky the Christmas poo?
Awful.
That drove me insane. I was like, way to date your book, And I wonder if that's like what people who were alive in the 70s or something feel like when he talks about Carrie like liking Flash Bobby Pickett or something. But I was like, Mr. Hanky, nobody's going to tattoo Mr. Hanky on their Adam's apple also.
Yeah.
And then I got the song stuck in my head. So it was just, it's bad.
Fleeger, what misery did you have?
I mean, I feel like I covered a lot of my distaste already, so I don't want to be a hater, but I did have Mr. Hanky written, and I'm just like, who would get that on their throat? But I mean, I guess it tells me what kind of character that is, but what a odd choice.
But at what cost?
I know. It's so weird. Keeping in mind too, it's like 17, almost 20 years. When did Mr. Hanky come out? 97, 98?
It was when it was in the 90s, late 90s.
Yeah.
Wow. So, I mean, what a
Because that was the first season, I think.
It wasn't the first season, but it was, I remember, here's the thing. I worked at McDonald's in the 90s, and I remember my boss at McDonald's making Mr. Hanky jokes all the time. So I know that it happened in the 90s. That's all I can say.
That man, Matt Parker. Yeah, Trey Stone. Trey Parker, Matt Stone. I messed it up. Yeah.
If they were my managers at McDonald's, it would have been awesome. Julia, do you have any misery?
I guess I want to spend less time with the angry men because I feel like that's par for the course. I feel like, yes, of course, this is what would happen. Yes, of course, everybody's going to get guns immediately. Yes, of course, they're going to shoot each other. Yes, of course. Like, it feels like, yes, Don Peters and Eric Glass are interesting as a pair because they're going to, feed each other's terrible psychopath tendencies. And there's interest in that, but also because they don't go as hard and it's not like I feel like Eric Glass like I do about Ace Merrill or Henry Bowers, where I'm like, I hate them, but I kind of like them because there's enough meat with them that but these guys, I just fucking kill these guys. I hate them, please.
Yeah.
Frank, fucking kill that guy. I'm so much more interested in what the women are doing in our place than I am about angry men being angry.
Did you find then the kind of like, because the last couple hundred pages are basically this gigantic firefight. Did you find that tedious?
No, I don't. But it is a kind of. I guess it could have been truncated a little, I suppose.
Yeah, it just kind of goes on and on. I like a good firefight. but I have to care about the people more, you know.
I guess I would prefer it to be, more like the ending of Under the Dome or Needful Things, where it's like you're going through the town and you're seeing what's happening to all of these people and how it's affecting them, and you're getting this little like slice of what's happening in this exact same time frame for everybody. That I find super satisfying. I love when he does that. I don't get that feeling here, which is, I feel shame.
I think he was trying to do it, but the characters just didn't have the same heft. You know what I mean? Or there wasn't enough diversity amongst the characters. And maybe that's just a consequence of, it just being all the dudes. But I don't know. I mean, we didn't have anyone, because I was thinking about Needful Things a lot too, but it's like all those guys were like so well drawn. Like we didn't have a Norris Ridgwick. We didn't have like a Buster Keaton. We didn't have like, that crew cut guy who gets his head blown off. Like all those guys were so well drawn in Needful Things, and they all represented these like fantastic, interesting archetypes. And I feel like we get shades of them in this book, but none of them pop. And it was just so unfortunate. Misery for me, Claudia the Dynamite Badia is such a stupid nickname, and they said it like 10 times. I'm like, that is not funny. That's just me though.
Somebody needs to use that as their nickname though.
Absolutely not.
Danny Dynamite. That's fine.
Danny Dynamite.
Or Danny the Body. I'll take either of those.
Jesse the Body is the only one who can say that. Okay.
Jesse the Mind.
True.
Well,
King's Dominion too.
Like, this is page 637. There's less than 100 pages to go. There's carnage and everywhere happening. And Jared goes, well, I was planning to go clubbing and drop some E, but I guess I could change my plans. Shut up, you little twerp. This is not the time. I hate stuff like that. Like,
well, no one calls it E in the mid 2015s time period when this was written.
I think the old farts who wrote it, they're just catching up. I mean, Lord knows I probably would have written that too.
They're just learning about Mr. Hanky, you know? And okay, I got one more, and this reminded me of Holly. I even in my notes I wrote, "Holly, give me eat your heart out." On page 502, when Lenny says, "Just what in the doodly fuck is going on?" It's like, that's
what in the
misery.
doodly
And,
poop.
you know,
do you think
doodly poop? Yeah.
Do you think Holly likes Mr. Hanky because she says poopy all the time?
She probably does.
Yeah.
Yeah. She's probably got it logged in her notebook.
She's got a tattoo on her back that we haven't seen yet.
Oh, God.
Tramp stamp.
That's what we find out.
Hanky tramp
and
stamp.
Never Flinch is that Holly has a Mr. Hanky tramp stamp.
Okay, let's talk about some
Make me like
stuff.
her.
Let's talk about some stuff we liked a little bit more in a section we call Word Processor of the Gods.
We're gonna make a new rule. Whenever I'm in here, you hear me typing. Whether you don't hear me typing, what the fuck you hear me doing in here, when I'm in here, that means that I am working. That means don't come in. Now, do you think you can handle that?
Yeah.
Fine. Why don't you start right now and get the fuck out of here?
All right, here in Word Processor of the Gods, we talk about sections that we found lovely, passages that worked for us. I can kick things off and just say, weirdly, one of the sections that I was most moved by was the book club, like Blanche and Company, like when they took lorazepams and drank wine and talked about books until they all fell asleep and they were kind of resigning themselves to death. And it was such a beautifully written little section. And there was one in particular, like right before Blanche passed out. I don't know, she's like reflecting on her own lost love, and she says, she's like watching all like the threads cover all of her friends' faces. The filaments that lay over her friend's mouth stirred as Gale exhaled. One fine line extended itself flirtatiously in Blanche's direction. I think he loved me too, but it was hard to explain. She was young. When you were young, your brain wasn't fully developed. You didn't know about men. It was sad. He had been married. She had waited. They had aged. Blanche had given up the sweetest part of her soul for a man. He had made beautiful promises and kept none of them. What a waste. And I just thought that was like simple, beautiful, effective. And I think it like says a lot about, you know, gender or like, you know, women's resentments towards certain men, like in like so concisely and so beautifully, you know what I mean? Just like promises not kept.
And like men's disregard for women's feelings and well-being too. But I actually, that scene I was going to say was one of my favorites in the book, because I think in the beginning, it does just seem like a book club. And then you're like starting to realize what is happening here. You're like, this is a suicide club.
Yeah.
I thought it was a great scene. I could have actually stayed there longer.
Yeah. And I like loved, I was so happy when they were when we got to the other world, and I'm like, oh, it's Blanche, my grandma. I love her.
Aw.
Jen, what did you have in the word processor?
Quite a few, but I think the one that I really loved the most is when Elaine is wanting to burn the tree. And I think I really loved a lot of these passages, not because I feel like they're particularly well written or pleasantly written, but that they just sound like shit that I say all the time. And it's really nice to hear somebody else say that. So she says, this world was ever so much better than the old man-driven one. No one yelled at her here. No one yelled at Nana. No one treated them like second-class citizens. This was a world where a little girl could walk home by herself, even after dark, and feel safe. A world where a little girl's talent could grow along with her hips and breasts. No one would nip it in the bud. Nana didn't understand that, and she wasn't alone. If you didn't think so, all you had to do was listen in at one of those stupid meetings. And then later, some of them undoubtedly would. The meeting women who couldn't understand what a good thing they had here, what a fine thing, what a safe thing. They were the ones so socialized to generations of servitude that they would eagerly rush back into their chains. The ones from a prison would counterintuitively probably be the first to want to go home to the old world and right back into the pokey from which they'd been released. So many of these childish creatures were unable or unwilling to realize that there was nearly always some unindicted male co-conspirator behind their incarceration. Some man for whom they degraded themselves. In her years as a volunteer, Elaine had seen it and heard it all a million times over. He's got a good heart. He doesn't mean it. He promises he'll change. Hell, she was vulnerable to it herself. In the midst of that endless day and night, before they fell asleep and were transported, she'd almost let herself believe, in spite of everything she'd experienced with Frank in the past, that he would do what she asked, that he would get control of his temper. Of course, he hadn't. And I love that passage because I was like, yes, think about these kinds of things. You are dooming the rest of womankind to a life of servitude. And I think we have been so conditioned to think that women are supposed to sacrifice and that it is our role to be the buffer and our role to die so that men don't have to be inconvenienced. There's another part where she says, does Frank think that I like to take care of him, that I like to do his laundry, that I like to cook? And I think we've convinced ourselves that we do like to fill those domestic roles. And some women really do. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that. And I do like taking care of my family, but we've convinced ourselves that that's what we're supposed to do. And the idea of women voluntarily going back into their chains because they can't see anything else is exactly what our place is designed to show us, is that there is another way. And now that I'm thinking back, maybe the message of this book is to show everybody that there can be another way. And all we have to do is allow ourselves to see it, and then maybe we can create it. Maybe not for our generation, but maybe for the next.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I love that.
Soapbox away.
No, I love it. Question. Did it confuse anyone else that Frank and Elaine's child was called Nana? Because I kept thinking it was an old woman.
What the fuck is that? Yes. Misery. Uh-huh.
Yeah, and I was also thinking of like Nana the dog from Peter Pan, and the fact that Frank is like a dog catcher. There's just like a lot going on. I also
that's what she's named after.
There were a lot of characters that shared names with actors that were in Stephen King, because there was like a Molly Ringwald. I was thinking Molly Ringwald.
That's funny.
That might just be my own
interesting
confusion.
No, that's funny. Was there a Corin, like Corin Nemec? Sorry. Okay. Flieger, do you have any word processor?
Yeah, I always like the kind of short and sweet Kingisms, and there's one where it's like, another part of getting older, you forget what you wanted to remember and remember what you wanted to forget.
Yeah, I love
like
that.
He always is good for a turn of phrase like that. And I only have one more. I had like a memo document that I could not find with some longer passages, but on the topic of Frank, and I think Randall, this will hit him hard. All Frank knew was that the ones you really had to watch out for in this world were the ones that couldn't love even a cat or dog.
Hell yeah. I think that's maybe why I liked Frank, because he beat up the guy who hurt his dog. And I'm like, yes, King, go off. Channel that. That's where to channel that anger.
Yeah.
Julia, do you have any word processor?
I do. And I mentioned her briefly before, but Tiffany Jones, who I think gets the most beautiful blossoming out of everybody in our place. And, Lila keeps thinking about the image of her with the horses and trying to invite the children to see how soft and warm they are and bringing them in, and becomes this different person around the animals and so self-confident. And also the note that she leaves for her son, and she knows that she's gonna die pretty much.
Yeah.
So she, if I can read her 10 rules for good living for us. 1, be kind to others and they will be kind to you. 2, do not use drugs for fun ever. 3, if you are wrong, apologize. 4, God sees what you do wrong, but he is kind and will forgive. 5, do not tell lies that it becomes a habit. 6, never whip a horse. 7, your body is your temple, do not smoke. 8, do not cheat, give everyone a square shake. 9, be careful of the friends you choose. I was not. 10, remember your mother will always love you and you will be okay. And it's so heartbreaking. And for me, the most heartbreaking thing is she misspells a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
And you're just like, oh, it's not her fault. She gets such a terrible ending, and she doesn't deserve it. And I would like to see her, blossom into something, but it is probably the most emotional scene in the whole book, I think, is her death.
Yeah.
I had her death in word processor too. I won't read it, but I just thought it was so, the way Lila talks about knowing and then knowing for sure, and just like that the last thing that we leave her on just holding her son for a little bit longer, and it's so beautifully tragic and simple. It was like, oh, it got me.
Those are all pretty literal too, but the whipping a horse, what do you think she means by that? Just like don't.
I think she literally means don't whip a horse.
Okay, that's what I was about to say. The rest of them were pretty straightforward.
I mean, she's in Appalachia, so it could be.
Yeah.
Similarly to the Blanche scene, there's just a little aside with Willie on page 608 near the end, and this just struck me as a total King thing. Like, he's like, I just want to write, like, I'm just going to do a little mini short story about him, because clearly he was having a lot of fun writing him. And he said, the old moonshiner was revisiting an unnamed square meter of hell in Southeast Asia in 68. Everything had been still, swamp water up to his Adam's apple, a layer of smoke closing out the sky, him sandwiched in the middle. Everything had been so still, and a bird, red and blue and yellow and massive, eagle-sized, had floated up beside him, dead, its eye clouded. The creature was so vivid and so incongruous in the strange light. Its glorious feathers had grazed Willie's shoulder, and the faint current had drawn it away, and it had vanished back into the smoke. Once he had told his sister about that. Never saw a bird like that before. Not the whole time I was there. Never saw one since either, of course. I wonder sometimes if it was the last of its kind. The Alzheimer's had taken most of what made her herself by then, but there had been a small piece left, and she had said, maybe it was just hurt, Willie. And Willie had said to her, I sure love you, you know. His sister had blushed. That's the kind of thing like any editor would
wonderful.
say. I know. Like any editor would say, cut that, like you don't need it. But that's the shit that makes it good, you know. Instead, cut the whole subplot with the fake daughter. Anyways, one other thing I just wanted to shout out was I was like a little bit of like the Garth Flinkinger character at first. I was like, I don't know how I feel about this guy. But the scene that I really loved was where Frank basically like broke down his door with an axe and then said, come help save my daughter. Like, and then Garth was like moved by that because he's like, all he wanted to do is just feel useful again. And that kind of relates in some ways to what I was saying about, you know, after the unthinkable happens and a lot of the old structures of society are gone, people can become useful again. And I think that's all some people want is we feel useless in life. And I think that was a really beautiful little scene. Like there was some line where I think like Garth was always so glad when he could, you know, help someone. And that to me is just a beautiful sentiment and the kind of thing that I think King can capture really well sometimes.
And also that he realizes he's in love with Michaela right before he dies. You know, and you're like, oh,
poor guy.
I didn't like you, and now I kind of like you, and now you're dead.
Now you're dead. Jen, what were you going to say?
I got one more.
Yeah.
It's Magda's, and when she comes back and realizes that Anton is gone, there is no happy ending for me here. She said on long sleepless nights, she drank and watched Boardwalk Empire. When she finished that one, she moved on to The Sopranos. She filled the empty hours with stories of mean men doing mean things. And at first I was ready to flag this as King talking about TV again, but then I really liked that because I was like, oh, those are shows about men. I really liked this idea that she wants to immerse herself in mean men doing mean things. And I talk a lot about like punch me in the face horror. Like she just wants to sink into her misery, which I felt really relatable when I want to watch really dark nihilistic shit like martyrs, that's
Yeah.
why,
I will say, like, drinking a little booze, watching Sopranos, there are worse nights.
That's
Yeah.
exactly. It'll cure what else.
Big Boardwalk fan. I'm pretty sure in the EW articles too, King shares that he is.
Yeah.
Yeah. We love us bros. We love our Boardwalk, don't we?
We love your mean men doing
We love
mean
our
things.
mean
Throw
men
out
doing
some
mean
Boardwalk.
things.
Here we go,
Yeah.
Nucky for the boys. Duckies for the boys.
All right, let's move over to the cemetery.
What's the bottom of the truth?
Well, sometimes that is better. The person you put up there ain't the person that comes back. It may look like that person, but it ain't that person. Because whatever lives in the ground beyond that cemetery ain't human at all.
Here in the cemetery, we talk about what spooked us. I didn't find this book particularly scary, but there were a couple gross sections, a couple deaths that I enjoyed. But I'll kick it over. Did anyone here, like Jen, did you find anything really spooky?
Not spooky, but incredibly disturbing, and I cannot get this phrase out of my mind. The steak knife episiotomy is like, both pregnancies was terrified that I was going to have this. If you don't know what it is, it's when you make an incision to make the vaginal opening wider during birth so that the baby can get out. And they're doing this with a steak knife in a restaurant. And I, like, even now,
it's like a serrated knife, not a butcher knife. If it was a butcher knife, it'd be one thing. It's the serrated part.
It's a serrated knife, and you're cutting and just talking. This passage later, where it's talking about it opening and closing and just gushing blood. I was like, Jesus Christ! It's just so upsetting because I mean that's pretty true to life. I mean, most people don't get it with a steak knife, but if you don't get an episiotomy, lots of times you rip, which I don't know.
Yeah, I don't even think that's ever a possibility in my life, and I felt that in my parts just hearing it.
Yeah. So yeah, that one. And I mentioned that in our Disgusting Moments episode also.
Nice.
You did.
Oh.
Yeah.
On 610, this is just like simple, but in that lovely, wonderful kingy way. They're talking about this guy, Nate McGee, who got ran over by a bulldozer, I believe. And they say the dead man's gas mask was full of blood and his torso had burst out around the straps of his vest.
Ugh.
Gore sprayed up from the crawler treads. Shreds of skin flap like streamers. It's just so nasty. I love it. Flieger?
So I thought just the silks in general were very scary. There was a little bit of like insomnia where like the strings would come up right to be cut. But with this, it almost gave me the visual of like the Last of Us games.
Oh yeah.
Where there's like almost this like fungus. There's something, but it almost has like a mind of its own. So the fact that as they would start to like nod off, the filaments would already start and like kind of like defying gravity, almost like your hair when you touch like, static electricity. And when they would be like wrapped in the cocoon, I couldn't help but think of like Killer Clowns from Outer Space because I think they even call it like a cotton candy filament.
Yeah.
But to me, that was like, I'm like, I really want to see this captured on a TV show because I just want to see how that is filmed.
I was going to say that is a very cinematic sort of
thing.
I kept thinking about that.
And that was like I said, like that was what was playing in my head, like the visualizing the novel. But I just anytime the actual cocoons were happening or the fact that when they were disturbed, because you think of like in the animal kingdom, like, praying mantis or a black widow, just like creatures, bugs that when you do mess with their nesting or their whatever cocoon, like there is just like this instinct to kill. So I thought that was very good and scary.
Yeah. Julia, what freaked you out?
Not being able to fall asleep.
Yeah.
I think, it's that kind of that Nightmare on Elm Street quality, right? Where you're like, you only have a finite time before you're going to succumb and like you're going to fall asleep at some point. So you better start trying to get to do what you want to do. And, the fact that your body and your mind deteriorates as you don't sleep. And so this horror of, and the girls keep trying to express this into the men. They're like, you don't understand. I'm going to fall asleep. It's not you. Like, you think you're scared. And like, what about me? And how horrifying that is. I think, also the just the violence of the men immediately like that, I was like, it takes less than a week and already there's just war happening immediately. Like for me, war is the scariest thing there possibly is. So, that is pretty fucking scary.
Yeah. I love one thing I think I wanted to mention earlier too was I love just them doing meth and like cocaine to like stay awake.
Yeah.
It's just such a fun
great
detail.
break. Linny is amazing, right? She stays up for so long.
I know. I was loving that.
I also almost noted Goody's headache power. Corey uses that shit all the time. He swears by it. So.
Is that a real thing?
It's a real thing. Yeah, I've got.
I
some
thought
in
it
my
was a
house.
Stephen King thing.
Nope, they're little packets, and it looks like cocaine. But
oh my god, I didn't know
open
that.
the paper up. Oh yeah, yeah. He swears by him, and it's kind of that way. You know how Jack Torrance chews Excedrin because it gets into your bloodstream faster. It's kind of like that.
Interesting. All right,
Yeah,
I'll have to try it.
I definitely had insomnia details in my. I'm a person who suffers from bad insomnia and all sorts of sleep issues, and just the way that was captured. And I thought I also had my notes the Nightmare on Elm Street when they're popping like no dose pills to stay awake, and just watching these people become like frazzled. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
I've got one more gross bit. 6:45.
Yeah.
Pearl staggered away from
I
the
had
creature that held him. He made almost a dozen steps before Mora caught him by the sweat-soaked collar. She drew him against her and stuck a thumb deep into his right eye. There was a pop, like a cork coming out of a bottle. Viscous liquid spilled down Pearl's cheek, and he went limp. That's like kind of classic King. He does that shit all the time. Like the pop is something he loves, but goddamn it, gets me every time. There's also a bit, I think it might be with Van. It's on 627, where they talk about like her bones grinding. Yeah, like she talks about the left leg of her pants was soaked with blood from hip to knee, and the adrenaline that had carried her this far was dwindling. But her hip where Misham had shot her was agony. Something was shattered in there. She could feel the bones grinding with every step. That I feel like he's done that in other books too. It always gets me. Like the bones grinding. Anyways, any other cemetery, Jen?
Yeah, I'm not going to read them, but the part where Jeanette's seeing her husband and talking about the rats and how they're gnawing, that part freaked me out. And then also, it's a couple of pages before the popping like a cork, but like the jaw bones parting. Company, like the way he wrote that was just so disgusting. Also want to note in the audiobook they say "meow" every time, and it drove me fucking insane.
All right, let's have a little fun in our next section, Pound Cake.
After all you've been taught, everyone isn't bad, Mama. Everything isn't a sin.
Come to your closet and pray, ask to be forgiven.
He's a nice boy, Mom. You like him. You really like him, Mama.
All right, here in Pound Cake, we talk about the blue stuff, the stuff that made us laugh, the stuff that made us blush. Right on page 11, this killed me. Let me see here. They even took a surprisingly candid detour to visit Paul Montpellier's earliest adolescent sexual experience when he had masturbated using the jaws of his little brother's stuffed crocodile. That is so specific that Owen or Stevie, one of them knows what that is. And they did that. I see you.
Crocodile. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty
that
terrifying.
Made me laugh very hard. What do you guys have?
I mean, there's a surprising lack of sex in this book.
It is true.
I would say I would be interested to see a sex scene between Clint and Evie, if that's supposed to be like he's the man, she's the woman. Like that would make sense to have more of a connection. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that could have added another dimension at least to that relationship.
Both of their characters. Yeah.
For a book so focused on gender, there is remarkably like it's a sexless kind of novel.
Well, it really is.
But also, you're writing with your dad. You don't want to
That's
get
actually a really good point.
too into it, right?
That's tremendous. They're both probably like, yeah, let's
not.
There was actually a line in the New York Times review that said basically something about how nobody in our place like ever talked about missing sex. You know what I mean? And how that felt a little bit bizarre.
One of them does. Says there's like a Friday night fuck that she misses.
Oh yes.
Oh yeah,
yes,
you are
does
right.
Talk about a Friday night fuck, but then
maybe a little bit more. Janet Maslin, you fucked up there too. So, but anyways, I also did. So
double zing.
I got one.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was gonna say I forget the character, but when he pisses his pants and what's her? I believe it's the arm wrestler, but one of them she says like, "Oh, well, I know that's not like a cum shot because there's way too much, and there's no way you're making that big of a stain in your pants." This toward the end.
I think that's Dawn and Angel.
Yeah, I love just the fact that there's an arm wrestling champion in this book.
She's one of my
And
favorite
then she gets the
characters.
second tattoo.
Yeah.
Your pride. All your fucking pride. And I'm like, yeah, go get it, Van.
This is one of the meth guys in the beginning on page 24. As a boy, he had stuck his finger up his butt and jammed it into the nostrils of smaller kids. I knew that guy when I was young, and it was stinky, and I hated him. Anton has some funny pound cake. He talks about slamming a juicy ass. And then he also uses the phrase yummy mommy at one point. Or something like that.
Ew.
I tried to find the quote and I couldn't, but I have the words yummy mommy written in my notes. So that's in there somewhere.
Just over and over again, just like Jack
Yummy
Torrance.
mommy. It's like, it's like Jack Torrance.
Oh, great. I have on page 194, I don't even know who says this. I think it's Dawn. There were more bushes than a jungle and no spearmen. It's like, gross. And then I also have, I feel weird about reading this in Pound Cake because it is an assault. But when Dawn is, anyways, Dawn says, "Easy, Jesus," he hissed. His breath was rotten with some spicy meat, maybe a Slim Jim or a pepperoni stick. "Wait, give me your hand." She gave it to him and he spat in her palm. "Now do it and tickle my balls a little." It's like,
tickle my balls. On page 132, I had this in Misery, but I moved it here because it's funnier. Pinocchio, that was the fairy tale about lying, and he didn't turn into a parakeet. His nose grew until it was as long as Wonder Woman's dildo. Terrible.
I remember that. Also, I was like, who the fuck doesn't know the story of Pinocchio? It's not obscure.
This reminds me of, like, there's this joke in Saved by the Bell that I watched every Saved by the Bell episode about 1,000 times when I was a kid. And there's a line where somebody says, like,
same.
He's got more zits than Bart Simpson or something like that. And I'm like, Bart Simpson doesn't have zits. Like, that's not a part of his character. And it always bothered me, even when I was a kid.
He's animated.
I was like, that joke, that was clearly written by someone who's never seen The Simpsons.
Yeah. In Boy Meets World, like, I remember Corey being like, "These kids are out there watching Beavis and Butthead," and it got like a standing O, and I was like, that's so lame. Even as a kid, I was like, stop trying to be so hip.
It's very funny. Okay, 526, we get Nubbins.
Sweater Nubbins.
Oh.
So obviously very important to this podcast. Please see our revival episode. Nubbins is a very funny word. That's all I have for Pound Cake. Anything else?
That's all I got.
All right, now let's do a little stroll in King's Dominion.
There's another world out there. I know there is.
I have a good chunk that I can rattle off, but I'll start with y'all. What King's Dominion do you have? Jen?
I've got a lot too, so I'll just do a couple and then maybe we can come back. Okay. Clint mentions running like the gingerbread man, which is like the gingerbread girl.
I wrote that down too.
And then someone, I can't even remember who, says, "Girls will kick your bumpty bumpty bump," which is what Trashy says. And then she is breathing into us and waking us up. And I thought, well, that sounds like John Coffey.
Yep. So, I also thought of John Coffey.
That's a good one. I did not get that one.
I got
Flieger.
I can do a couple. So the prison library has books from Peter Straub, Joe Hill, and Stephen King.
Yep.
Which is mentioned. We mentioned Frank breaking down the door with the axe, a la Jack. Obviously, the women suffering from insomnia. That's a bit of a stretch to connect it. But one other one is the helpful tiger, which also exists in Wind Through the Keyhole.
I was thinking about that as well, yeah.
And one added trivia that I know King dropped in there, they say the roar sounded like the MGM lion. And for those in the know, the MGM lion is a tiger roar that's just superimposed on the lion because tigers have deeper roars. So I thought that was King just being a little like wink to us in the cinema club.
Was Nat Geo heads?
Yeah. And then my final one is all I got. On page 330, there was a man in jeans, a blue chambray work shirt.
Yes.
Yep.
Excellent.
I got the work shirt.
I have, so on 213, he talks about there is a dead zone in between the two prison gates.
Yep.
He talks about Clint's ringtone is "Hey Jude." So for our Dark Tower junkies, we have a connection there. So I don't know if he's trying to make Clint seem like some sort of gunslinger type character or what he's doing there. And then there's a line where Jared said, "The world didn't seem weird then. The world didn't seem like the world at all, but like another place you had been flipped into." And as we know, Jack Sawyer likes to flip into other worlds in The Talisman and Black House. So those are mine.
That's correct.
Very good. Very good.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well,
I get so excited every time there's a connection. You guys have no idea. I have my highlighter. I got my sticky notes.
I love it.
On page 118, I was thinking like weird Dark Tower stuff too. On page 118, somebody says like that includes my wife, my loving Susanna, and it's spelled the same as Dark Tower. And there's also mention, I'm trying to find the exact part. There is mention of like a gunslinger or something like that. It was like on the same page. I can't find it. Either way, it just seemed weird. The phrase bag of bones is used on page 40. Dean Koontz is mentioned on page 135. Got to call out Koontz. I thought the rats reminded me of Desperation, where Tack can like control the various animals in the same way Evie can. But also there was an alpha rat, which made me like a mother rat, which made me think of Graveyard Shift.
Yeah.
On page 276, someone uses the phrase fuckery, which we, as we all know, is one of Beaver's favorite phrases in Dreamcatcher. The prison raid reminded me of Black House. There was a very similar storyline there where like the people were trying to storm the prison. This is the biggest one, and I can't believe nobody's mentioned it. On page 653, we find out Evie has green pubes.
I have that, yes.
And the
Like
Lawnmower Man also has green pubes. Even in the early days of this podcast, when we talked about Night Shift, we talked about green pubes quite a bit. And I would say for at least the first year of the podcast, hashtag green pubes was a running joke. So this was hugely funny to me.
But it's always Lawnmower Man's pubes are green because he's naked and like sliding through the grass and he has like grass stains, but hers are actually vegetation growing out of her.
It's
right?
true.
I always assumed Lawnmower Man's was vegetation too.
Hey,
I
look,
thought it was just like
at
he's
the
been,
end of the
he's
day,
been laying on grass.
Oh, okay.
at the end of the day, they're still green. And
Still green down there.
I got you.
Still
I
counts.
got you.
on 656, someone is described as being a slow pupil. That's the opposite of an apt pupil.
Ah.
Okay, maybe a little room 237.
I like it. No, I like it.
Thank you. That's all I have. Did I miss any?
I've got a couple more.
Let's go.
In chapter 15, we mentioned Wild Bill Hickok, which is what they call Bill Wharton in the Green Mile. And then also on page 111, I think it's Don. Don says, "Cop my joint," which is what Percy Wetmore says when Wild Bill is coming onto the mile. He copped my joint. We also, they mentioned Camay soap, which is one of the brands that Jack smells when he goes into the bathroom in the Overlook.
Damn.
And he mentions chipped beef on toast or calling it shit on a shingle. I cannot remember where this is from, but I know King has written about eating shit on a shingle and or chipped beef on toast and calling it shit on a shingle. Bleh. And also the car that runs over the dog at the very beginning is a speeding Mercedes.
Ooh.
Like,
man, those are good catches. This isn't really King's Dominion, but did anyone else notice that there were 2 references to Hulk Hogan in this book?
No.
At the time, I did, but I cannot
That's
recall
Randall's
they were.
Dominion. I know. I was very amused by that. I was like, please give me one more. Please give me one more.
I figured you would call it out. I remember as I'm reading, like, Randall's not going to let this slide by.
What if Hulk Hogan had been in The Running Man? That would have been perfect.
I mean, I would
that
say
probably would have been actually one of the only film roles that he would have been good in.
I would say that would have been great, but they had Jesse Ventura, and he was the better choice, anyways.
That's true. But what if they could have had both?
If they could have had both, it would have been great. But I'm just saying, like at least they had Jesse. And I will say,
that's true. And I would prefer him over everybody else.
Hogan was fantastic in Suburban Commando. Just
I saw that in theaters. I liked it as a kid, but I've had obviously big change. But I also think Schwarzenegger would have been threatened by Hogan because he's a little too close in size.
Yeah,
that might be true.
Whereas Jesse, he could pat on the head.
Also,
okay,
they have that Predator connection. You know?
Let's wrap it up in our final thoughts.
Dad, can we go now?
You ready?
Yeah, we've been ready for an hour.
Okay, I'll be right there.
You said that a half hour ago. Yeah, my dad's weird. He gets like that when he's writing.
All right. Here in Final Thoughts, we share our final thoughts and our bright red Pennywise clown nose ranking, as well as our MVP. Julia, I'm going to start with you.
I think that this book is definitely worth reading. I think it raises some interesting questions. I think that we can discuss this much about it is a good sign, right? And it's even if it's okay if it doesn't answer all the questions as long as it makes you ask questions, I feel like. So the fact that we've been like, oh, but what if this happened and why didn't we explore this? I think even if you look at it as a stepping off point for what you want in this kind of discussion, I think that that's a cool way to go about it. I would love him to collaborate with his sons because it makes me happy that they do it, and like the way they talked about it makes my heart really warm. So I would say read Sweet Sleeping Beauties. I dug it, and I think people are way too harsh on it. That's how I feel.
What's your clown nose
nose rating?
ranking?
All
And
of
your-
them.
yeah.
I give them
All the noses? You're giving it 5?
Yeah, let's do it.
Wow.
All right. And your MVP?
Mm-hmm.
Let's go.
I mean, Evie's the one who's really making us the most intrigued, even if it's frustrating. So she gets my
Word.
vote.
Awesome. Flieger, let's go.
Ooh, it's a tough act to follow. Like I said, this is the second to last book on my Stephen King journey for now until more
Yeah.
novels come out. So I've been saving the collaborations toward the end just to kind of be a purist. And I do think it is really cool that he collaborates with, different children on a number of projects. This one, however, just did not speak to me. I think somewhere in here is a good story. So for that reason, I would put Owen King as my MVP because I think the story, the pitch is great. Like when I first heard what this was about, I was like, that sounds awesome. I just think something gets lost in the sauce here. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to give this 2.5 bright red Pennywise clown noses, but I tip my cap to the world of women because it ain't easy. It's a man's world, as they say in this book. But what is it
All
without
right.
women, right?
Jen, you're up.
I have had a real roller coaster with this book this time. I do think it's a very interesting premise, and I think it's worth reading, although I think it's about 200 pages too long and maybe 40 characters too full. But I think it's interesting, and I like the question at the heart of this is what does a world look like without patriarchy, without men, and is that preferable to what we have? I find that really interesting and worth asking. But I think I like this book more for what it means to King's canon than an actual book for me to sit down and enjoy reading. I think I like it as a stepping stone into kind of King writing about characters with different races and kind of trying to overtly understand women. I think the allegory bogs it down. Like when I think about a feminist King book, I think about Gerald's Game and I think about Firestarter. And those are not trying to be messages and they're not trying to examine a moral quandary. They just are because they're good stories and King followed that trail. And I feel like here there are parts of it that just feel a little forced. I think some of the characters fall short for me. And I ultimately leave this book feeling hopeless. I think I want a more satisfying answer to this question that King is posing. And I think the answer I walk away from is we're going to think about it, but we're never going to do anything to actually change. And that really was hard to read right now. So I'm going to give it 2.5 stars, I think, because I agree with you, Dan. I think there was a really great book here. And I think Killing Your Darlings a little bit more would have gotten us there. And I think MVP, I'm giving it to Evie simply because of the green pubes.
All right.
I was surprised by that rating. Yeah.
I'm also going to give it 2.5 bright red Pennywise clown noses. I think this book I think it gets more hate than it deserves. But I also
I agree with that.
I also think it is, I think it's kind of like a balloon filled with paint that's splattered on the ground. Like it is a lot of interesting ideas that doesn't really cohere to me. But I also think that there's almost this trap in that the premise itself is rich and fertile, but it raises questions that it raises so many questions and invites so many different reads and so many different possibilities that I feel as if Stephen and Owen King kind of walked into, like, once they found themselves so deep in the bramble of it all, they were like Macaulay Culkin and My Girl getting stung by all the hornets. And they were like, we just have to run out of here. And the book really does feel to me a little bit like it just kind of ends. And I think I think a lot of it feels unresolved purposefully, because I think that the book I actually thought a lot about while I was reading this was Rose Matter. That's also a book that's about the various evils of men. But what he does in that book is he wraps all of them into one monstrous man. And that gives him the freedom to dispatch that man in a very satisfying fashion. Here, they're trying to do something that's more sophisticated, but it's less successful and less satisfying than Rose Matter for me, because there's no real ending, at least in the version that they have created, that is satisfying. I think there is a satisfying ending. I just don't think they found it, and I don't think they necessarily push themselves to find it. We talked a little bit about, like, Frank not feeling like the dial was turned all the way up, that there was a restraint there. And I think that can be said for a lot of the characters in this book, and also just for the action of this book, that it goes to a precipice, but it doesn't try to jump over it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I find that interesting. And I think this book gives you a lot to chew on as we kind of see with this conversation, which I've really enjoyed, because I think this book invites, the thing is, there are people who would read this book and I think lose their minds. Like, I think very insecure people would read this book and it would make them very angry. You know what I mean?
No, why?
because I think certain men would say, well, it's like you were saying earlier, Jen. Well, you just want to kill all men. All men are bad, right? All men are bad, right? And I don't think the book's trying to do that. But at the same time, I think that it throws too many apples in the stew. And it's like the essentialist kind of argument, right, Jen? Like we were talking about. And so I do think that some nuance gets lost. And I think the nuance that we've given it as readers is definitely there in the book. But I think that we are being a bit generous in that read. But that's because they've cast the net so wide. So there's a lot of credit to be given to them. I don't love this book, but I admire it in a lot of ways. And it's always with King. This is what he'll always be able to get credit for moving forward, is that it's not as if, especially in his later years, it's not as if he ever shrunk away from controversial or minefield topics. You know what I mean? He jumps right into them. And a lot of times he pisses me off because I hate his point of view sometimes, like, especially with the later books. But I always admire him for doing it. Even with something like Holly, which I really struggled with. Like, I give him credit for always trying to have his finger on the pulse. And exploring ideas. So I know I'm babbling a little bit. I do think this book is really cool.
I'm interested to see Julie in like 10 years. It's going to be the renaissance of Sleeping Beauties, and then we're all going to have our feet in our mouth. But
no, I don't think I'm going to have I think I'm holding by my 2.5.
Yeah, I'm keeping it with my scale. I'm not a hater either.
Yeah, but I think that this is a book that's a lot. I think it is essential if you're a King fan to read.
Yeah.
And my MVP, I'm going to say Eric Blass, because I love a psycho teenager. Okay, so let's wrap it up with some plugs. Julia, what do you got going on?
So you can find me on my other podcasts, Horror Movie Survival Guide and Jodorowsky. And then if you would like to watch my Stephen King Dollar Baby, you can watch it on Arrow's streaming service or email me and we'll see what happens.
Love it. Jen, what's going on?
You can find me at Jen Ferratu. Also find me co-hosting the Girls on the Boys podcast with Rachel Reeves. We are about to start talking about some Bronson movies. And then on the Lady Killers, we have just set our lineup for the next 3 or 4 months. But we are about to record an episode on Inside, which I am dying for because I love that movie so fucking much. Oh, it's so good. You got to watch it. But just, prepare yourself because steak knife episiotomy fits that vibe. And then on Murder Made Fiction, we are talking about Ted Bundy. So we just talked about shockingly, extremely something vile and something. And apparently Chad Michael Murray plays Ted Bundy in a movie. So I'm going to watch that tonight. So
Have you
follow me on Jim Fratu and I'll post it all.
Have you read Anne Rule's book about Ted Bundy?
Yes, The Stranger Beside Me. I just finished
good.
that. It's very interesting.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. We'll talk about it sometime. Flieger, where can people find you?
Oh, my death metal band is dropping a new single, Steak Knife Episiotomy.
Wait.
So check me out on Dark Tower Detour on the Patreon. I don't know if we'll have another one coming before the end of the year, but we have about like 10 of them up there, and they're pretty interesting. And also, I was just on an episode with Julie and Jen, King's Most Disgusting Moments. And I think we all realized during it that we are not people that can dwell in the world of disgust very easily because our skin was crawling. And we joked that, we needed like a Caffrey there sometimes to kind of
wallow.
cut.
He's the
but
real
it was
sicko.
so interesting the way we all approached disgusting in different ways too.
Yeah.
So that was really
There was
fun
not as much
episode.
overlap as we had predicted originally.
No.
And it also kind of reminded us just how gross Stephen King can get beyond just the horror and the psychological. He can give you shivers a variety of ways.
Love it. Awesome. And on the Losers Club, it's almost the end of the year. And if I'm being honest, I don't even remember what we're covering next. Is it The Outsider?
Well, I think this is our last book.
I think this is our last book of the year.
Yeah.
I know we're doing a long watch on Maximum Overdrive next month.
Vroom. Yes.
So
we've got a King Miss episode and a Kingsgiving episode. So
a lot of good stuff. Thank you,
lots of
John.
fun stuff. Yeah.
I will say I also caught an early screening of Kyle Mooney's movie Y2K, and it is
it tomorrow.
It's really fun. Yeah, the episode will be. I was going to say I'm moderating the Q&A, but with Kyle Mooney, but this episode will already be up by then. Anyways, I'm just going to say that movie is like low-key inspired by Maximum Overdrive and The Lawnmower Man. So like very clearly. So buckle up for that. It's really fun. It's a very funny movie. Okay, I'm going to sign off. Long days and pleasant nights. Bye.
I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. I got some hot friends. God, I got some hot friends. But you know you want somebody to treat you good.
You've made it to the end of another bloody, disgusting podcast. Congratulations. If you like our programming, consider searching for other bloody, disgusting podcasts, such as Creepy, Horror Queers, The Boo Crew, SCP Archives, Nightlight, Margaret's Garden, and more.